Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D and WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Deku Became Batman. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Droplets hit the wool tatami, soaking into the carpet. The patter isn't as dense as rainfall, nor is it quite as heavy. However, it does seep through the material as wet as liquid can possibly be. Blood is the devil's ink. Clay can create too. The combination of both can be molded into anything. Kai Chisaki, young head of the Yakuza, is capable of morphing and reshaping too, with his touch-based quirk. All it takes is 5 fingers coming into contact with something to perform a complete overhaul, which is why his subordinates find it odd that he isn't wearing his gloves to prevent accidental deconstruction. They know better than to question their superior though. They wouldn't dare go against their boss, so they keep quiet about it. They just go about their business, taking their seats at the table they were called to. Joy Irinaka, general manager of the Shai Hasekai, counts wads of bills. A stack of yen begins to pile up behind him. Hari Kirono, being Chisaki's assistant, brews tea to deliver. It's so quiet in the room occupied by the entire force of the Yakuza that it's eerie. Even Rappa and Katsukame, as large as he is, remain silent. Nemoto and Satsuno share a look, communicating telepathically even without the usage of quirks. Then again, anyone in the room would be able to know what the other person is thinking in this atmosphere. The brewer beeps to alert Kirono it's ready to be poured. The sound is not just to inform them that the tea is ready. It's an indicator that the meeting can finally begin. However, before it can, there comes a disruption. The old-fashioned shoji Japanese sliding door that makes up the room's entrance and exit is pushed open. Nobody had been expecting anyone else to attend the meeting. Least of all, a second Kai Chisaki. All eyes flick towards one or the other, discomfiture and consternation brewing faster than the tea did. The Chisaki in the doorway glares at his doppelganger with menacious golden eyes. They each share the same wardrobe, green bomber jackets with purple fur collars. Despite the beak-shaped masks covering their jaws, the facial features are so similar that they could be mistaken for twin brothers. The only notable difference is that the one in the doorway does have his white surgical gloves on, whereas the one at the head of the table does not. The impostor becomes evident then. The Yakuza turn on who had duped them, though he's not the real Kai Chisaki. His fingers are just as deadly. The 5 digits become elongated, jutting out and spearing Yu Hojo before he can crystallize. The deceptive identity thief is well informed of the Yakuza group's members. Fraudulent Chisaki's informant had been rather thorough about each of their quirks in particular. And here I was about to give the performance of a lifetime. Fake Chisaki retracts his 5 fingers from Hojo. Now a lifeless corpse, the Yakuza's body falls to the floor. The gangster's killer stands up, stealing their face next. Chisaki's brown hair retreats into his head as his facial structure is reconstructed. Even his clothes change completely, leaving no trace of former identity. Bastard! Katsukame roars in anger as he rears his colossal fist. Right behind him, the rest of the Yakuza are as equally infuriated. The intruder didn't just steal Hojo's appearance. Diamonds cover his body, taking the impact head-on. The sturdy makeshift armor is just enough to shelter him as he's sent crashing through a wall. The diamond chips, cracks, and then shatters as he tumbles across the floor. How dare you use the boss's face? Irinaka lets loose a shrill shriek while pursuing the infiltrator. He doesn't expect Hojo's body snatcher to transform their arm into an axe, ready for the assault. In one swift swing, fake Hojo chops Irinaka in half. Intestines unravel and blood spills just like that. The real Chisaki has had enough. He himself rushes in, intent on touching the interloper in order to disassemble their shape-shifting body. As always, when he does make contact, the body bursts, blood sprays in all directions, flesh completely liquefied. As much as he hates the sight of blood, he can't help but grin beneath his mouthpiece. However, that toothy smile doesn't last. The red liquid changes its shade of color, graying and turning thicker. It collapses in heavy heaps instead of being a wet splash. It oozes worse than gore. It makes his skin crawl and causes hives to break out across his face. The deconstruction of clay doesn't matter when the putty is able to be reshaped. Fake Hojo drips all over the carpet, clay face melting with the rest of his body like a wax figure in heat. A gurgling sound is the only warning the Yakuza gets before the intruder stretches his arm again, long appendage serving as a thick whip. Despite being made of clay, it packs a heavy hit. Satsuno and Nemoto are slammed into the ceiling, bones crumbling from the force of impact. Katsukame charges the clay figure with another massive fist cocked back. When his knuckles connect, the liquid splatters just like when Chisaki's quirk took effect. But that doesn't finish the fight. The clay chute spikes up from its many puddles, piercing the hulking Yakuza member from all angles. Katsukame unleashes a primal scream while trying to retreat from the spires spearing his body. What are you? Chisaki mutters under his breath as he watches the unkillable slime slam into Rappa next. Rappa's punches have no effect on the liquid, every blow absorbed by the clay. The fight is futile. Kurono hurries to stand by Chisaki's side. There's an urgency in his tone when he pleads, "You need to evacuate." While it's distracted, but they don't get the chance to escape, even if they wanted to try. A spike stabs through Kurono's chest, impaling him on the spot. When it retracts, there's a hole at his epicenter. Chisaki's assistant slumps to the ground, joining the other dead Yakuza there. Sakaki, who had opted for booze over tea, has his brains bashed in by a clay hammer. That same clay then forces its way down Tabe's throat, imploding the man from the inside out. Not even Tengai's shields are enough to hold back the force of the unkillable liquid. He's eventually buried by the weight of the clay closing around him and crushed. Chisaki grits his teeth, grinding them together behind his beak-shaped mask. His golden glare watches as the clay morphs until it matches his appearance. "What is it that you want?" He addresses himself with venom in his voice. "Transfer all of your assets to this offshore account." His living reflection sounds exactly like him, although his movements aren't mirrored. Fake Chisaki reaches into his coat pocket to pull out a cell phone, offering it to the real Chisaki. Real Chisaki taps numbers into the device, carefully avoiding touching it with all 5 of his fingers. After he's finished wiring money into the bank account, he hands it back. "Done," he growls before asking, "Anything else?" Fake Chisaki's eyes lift in delight, making an expression on the man's face that not even himself had ever seen him have before. Then, the impostor's hand takes the form of an axe again. It makes a clean cut, beheading the real Chisaki. The voice that comes out of the fake Chisaki is no longer masculine. A feminine, cheerful response answers the dead man's question, "Nope." The still-living Chisaki changes his hair color without having to dye it, brown locks becoming blonde. His chest develops a modest bust and his manhood becomes womanly. Pretty soon, he puts a pep in his step that's much too bubbly for a gangster. He becomes the murderous girl, Himiko Toga, the ex-member of the League of Villains and former partner of Anarchy. She skips her way to the nearest wall, avoiding the bodies laying by her feet. It feels good to be cute again, she thinks. A miniskirt and a cardigan is much cozier than a business suit and a heavy coat. Her now uncalloused hands touch one of the many corpses, smearing them in blood. She's only been doing as she was instructed, but she has to admit that it's been fun. And now she even gets to finger paint with blood. Her hands slap the wall, sliding up in a wide arc and curving down. At the bottom, she dots it with one final smack. Once she's finished, she sucks on each of her fingers. It's better than licking sauce off of them. Toga can't suppress the giggle that escapes her grin full of fangs as she saunters out of the room, leaving behind her a bloody question mark. Bats skitter as they return to their roosts in the upper reaches of the cave, carefully segregated from the more delicate electronics of their master's headquarters. Izuku Midoriya, as nocturnal as the creatures he shares company with in the underground lair, is stationed at the biggest of assorted machines. A massive screen displays more media outlets than the naked eye could skim. Surrounding the articles are various street cams, the live footage watching dark crevices and corners closely. The sole survivor of the Midoriya bloodline monitors the massive computer display intently, even when he's not prowling the streets or patrolling from the rooftops. He remains a watchful guardian. The Dark Knight works as endlessly as he does tirelessly to prevent another night like the one that took his parents from him from ever happening again. His matte black suit, cape, and cowl blend with the cave's atmosphere. The winged sigil emblazoned on his chest is the same as the winged creatures also dwelling in the dark. He is the legendary Batman. Behind him is a girl who had also been orphaned. She was held in captivity by the Yakuza until he had rescued her, and now he has taken her under his wing. Her silver flow of hair hangs over a German Shepherd and Great Dane mix, another stray that he had taken in. She runs her hands over the dog's coat of black fur, petting it gently. A silver tag hangs from the hound's dark blue collar, the name Ace engraved in the metal. Midoriya had never imagined he would have a pet, let alone an adoptive daughter. He never thought his crusade as Batman would allow him to have such attachments. Yet, Eri is the best ward he could have asked for, and Ace drooling while he sleeps isn't so bad either. Though Kurajiri would beg to differ, considering he's the one who mops the floor every time. Surrogate father, butler, caretaker, and accomplice to Midoriya, he too dwells in the cave at this time. The man made of purple mist is dressed in his own suit, albeit is much more fashionable than Kevlar armor. "It's nearly dawn, sir. Your winged namesakes are retiring for the day." Kurajiri glances about the cavernous space to watch bats swoop from stalactites despite directly addressing Midoriya. "Perhaps you should consider doing the same." Midoriya mimics Kurajiri, pointing the direction of his gaze elsewhere while addressing him. Later, there's still some work to be done. The vigilante taps at the keyboard in front of him to pull up additional news reports. As comical as it may be on Batman, He should really get a pair of reading glasses considering how much time he puts into researching documents. Kurogiri pauses, wanting to push the matter further, but yields in the end. He settles for a hum of disapproval to let Midoriya know his feelings. Then he directs his attention to Eri. "And what about you, little lady?" The young girl casts a look towards Midoriya, hair whipping with the sudden motion. When all she gets is his back instead of the support she was hoping for, she returns her gaze to Kurogiri. Knowing all too well what he meant, she whines indignantly, "Come on. Can't I stay up just a little bit longer?" Kurogiri's yellow slants peer into Eri's bright red orbs. Her puppy eyes are stronger than the actual dog's or even Midoriya's when he was her age. He sighs, unable to say no to such a face. He does, however, know how to guilt Midoriya into doing his dirty work for him. "Of all the bad habits she could have picked up from you, I suppose insomnia isn't the worst." Kurogiri talks to the man's back but knows he hears every word. Finally, Midoriya swivels in his chair to face them. The faint glow from the computer screen casts a shadow over his face that just barely hides the bags under his eyes. There's stubble growing around his jaw, his chin in desperate need of a shave. He looks like a tired dad and he hasn't even done any of the parenting yet. There's a brief moment where both Kurogiri and Eri think he's going to defend her as well as himself. "Aren't you forgetting that tomorrow is a big day for you? You're going to need all the rest that you can get." But then he reminds the girl that she'll be taking the entrance exam for UA in the morning. Eri pouts, more frustrated that he backed Kurogiri up instead of her over having to go to bed, but surrenders to the logic. "Fine." Ace whines when she stops petting him to head for the elevator lift. Kurogiri takes over, scratching the mutt behind the ears. The dog's complaints cease. As Eri walks away, she shouts over her shoulder, "Don't forget to feed the bats." To which Midoriya raises a brow. "You feed the bats?" The bats prefer free-range corn-fed chicken goujons gently fried in extra virgin olive oil. Kurogiri recalls the dinner he has been cooking upstairs before adding as an afterthought, "with chives." Midoriya rolls his eyes at the man's antics before returning his attention to the supercomputer. Now that Eri is gone, he freely shares what it is that he's been invested in. The shy Hasekai have been killed. The blunt announcement causes Kurogiri's usually slanted eyes to broaden a bit in surprise. The men who were holding Mistress Eri in captivity. He pats Ace on the head one last time before joining the vigilante at the computer station. Now that he's able to get a closer look at what's on the screen, he finds himself skimming through police reports and website articles. The entire Yakuza was brutally massacred. The present seems like the worst time to be making lighthearted jokes about the murder, but the butler can't help himself. "It seems someone has saved you the trouble of having to do it yourself." Knowing all too well what was under the bandages around Eri's arms and legs, and how long those scars took to heal, Midoriya doesn't disagree with that sentiment. Yet, he took a vow, and he has a mission that he must stay committed to. The mask hanging behind him with his cape is what he became to uphold that promise. "I'm going to investigate and find out who did it." The vigilante pulls it over his face while slowly rising from his seat. "I was afraid you were going to say that." Kurogiri ducks his head down in dismay. The dedication that Midoriya puts into his crusade far surpasses the amount of effort he puts into running his company. Numerous times has the caretaker received calls complaining that the young philanthropist fell asleep during business meetings. That's when Midoriya doesn't show up late or miss them entirely. Now donning his cowl as Batman, the caped crusader marches past Kurogiri with a vengeful aura. The white lenses where his eyes should be are narrowed more than Kurogiri's yellow slits. The horns atop the Dark Knight's head create a demonic visage that horrifies criminals. But the butler himself can't help but also feel something at the sight of the boy he raised becoming such a monstrosity. But in a city of monsters, that boy had no choice but to become one himself. Midoriya is convinced that it was a monster which took his parents from him. And it takes a monster to scare another monster. That's what Batman is meant to be. The night itself has become something to be feared by villains and criminals rather than something to revel in. It can't be helped that there was a ripple effect. Batman became feared by forces of good as well. Batman became something they didn't understand. And people always fear what they don't understand. Pro-heroes and police couldn't define the legend as merely a vigilante, nor a myth or an urban legend, because Batman is a very much real creature of nightmare. So when Batman arrives at the familiar stronghold that had once been the base of operations for the Yakuza, he has to sneak into the crime scene rather than strutting in. His nose picks up the scent of rust before he ducks under tape meant to close off the area. He recognizes the sickeningly dry yet sweet metallic waft of air as the smell of blood. As it dries and ages, blood takes on a vile pungence that smothers your senses and suffocates your breath. He almost reaches for the rebreather stored in one of the various compartments of his utility belt, but forces himself to endure it. As he steps over bodies covered with preservation tarps, he wishes he could have been the first to analyze the scene before forensics could contaminate the area. It'll be harder to uncover evidence since nothing went untouched and they likely already confiscated some of their finding. The yellow markers littering the floor tell him there are things missing. Eventually, he finds an occupied room. Not all police and pro-heroes are afraid of him. Two that he formed an alliance with are currently talking with a few other law enforcement members. The commissioner himself, Naomasa Tsukachi, and the #1 hero Lemillion had agreed to work with him. Batman stands between the doorway and where the hallway bends, out of sight from everyone except for the commissioner if he looks at the tiny sliver where the door is cracked. When Tsukachi notices the vigilante shrouded in shadows, his rectangular eyes widen behind the frames of his glasses. The graying mustache on the commissioner's upper lip curls before he waves for the other officers in the room to clear out. Can you give me and Lemillion a moment of privacy? Mirio Tagata, the symbol of hope as All Might's successor, gives Tsukachi a questioning glance. He hasn't been made aware of Batman's presence yet. Not until the room is cleared out by the cops that were also oblivious does the vigilante step into the light. Tagata's face twists behind his visor, shocked to see the fellow caped crusader. Hey, Bats. Lemillion suddenly understands why Tsukachi had the room cleared out. Tagata holds out a hand for Batman to shake, beaming a smile that All Might would have been proud of. The #1 hero had become a lot friendlier since the night he and the commissioner contacted Batman by a signal in the sky. Midoriya believes the reason why is that he's trying to mend their initial introduction in order to move forward with a better relationship, though he can't be certain. He's not the trusting type. Batman brushes by Tagata, cape closed around his body, ignoring the outstretched hand. To Lemillion, it seems cold. The pro-hero might think the vigilante holds a grudge. For Batman, it's just a precaution in the presence of such a powerful being. The bat-themed vigilante steps into the zone a little further, inspecting the blood spillage with a thoughtful stare. The Yakuza was full of formidable members. For them all to be eliminated and dispatched in such a grotesque way, it poses a lot of questions. The first that comes to mind is, who could have done this? Tsukachi huffs, like he's holding back a laugh. His expression looks anything other than amused. That's what I was going to ask you. The commissioner pushes up the glasses that are sliding down his nose before asking, what do you make of this mess? Not having investigated the murder scene for himself yet, Batman doesn't answer. The dark detective instead kneels down to inspect the blood-soaked carpet. It squelches under the pressure of his gloved finger poking the still dampened fabric. Lemillion opens his mouth to say something, but nothing comes out. Nervously, he rubs the nape of his neck with his own gloved hand. After watching the vigilante search the scene a while longer, he works up the courage to try again. He worriedly glances about while asking Tsukachi, should we be letting him touch stuff? The commissioner shrugs, not sharing the pro-hero's concern. Batman seems competent enough that he won't contaminate anything, which is more than can be said about official heroes. He'll do no more harm than if you were to touch anything. Taking mild offense, Tagata pivots to shoot Tsukachi a look of exasperation. I didn't. Lemillion holds his hands up to show that they're clean as though that's all the proof he needs. Batman suddenly interjects, Himiko Toga. They each whirl back around to face the vigilante, sharing similar expressions of confusion. Tagata tilts his head. Tsukachi raises his eyebrows. What? The vigilante is still knelt down, his back facing the two members of law enforcement. Blood isn't the only liquid that the dark detective has discovered. Beneath the carpet is something much thicker. It's what had a squelching reaction when he had touched it. Batman swabs a sample of gray goop that he distinctly remembers analyzing before. She recently went missing from her cell, did she not? He also recalls capturing the crazed blonde when apprehending Anarchy. As he scoops the hoary liquid into a vial to take back to his personal crime lab, he thinks about her escape from prison shortly after. Yeah, she did. Tsukachi, on the other hand, would rather not have any recollection of the deranged woman. Against his better wishes, he dares to ask, why? You got something. Batman finishes collecting the evidence he discovered, sliding the miniature test tube into one of his various belt pouches. It was just a drop, but it's a lead. He ponders over her potential involvement, racking his brain to figure out the mystery of her presence. Maybe. Lemillion folds his arms over one another across his chest, covering the golden number there. His wide forearms are pure muscle. His presence is powerful as he too mulls things over. You can't possibly think a villain of her caliber could have done all this, do you? But his confidence in his own abilities can be his own downfall if it blinds him of the potential in others he perceives as below him. Batman ignores Tagata, glancing over his shoulder to address Tsukachi instead. Have forensics check for traces of solvent, resin, and mastics in the DNA of the victims. The vigilante has a hunch that involves Toga's quirk residue. The way the bodies are dismembered and the amount of blood stains splattering the walls like paint has him looking for a pattern. Tsukachi turns around, facing away from the vigilante. He understands that Batman is asking for permission without doing so verbally, and he also knows full well what for. Do what you have to. I didn't see anything. He talks to the wall instead of the man behind him, appreciating the gesture. I'll let you know if there's any other substances you should be looking out for. Batman cooperates by agreeing to share his findings later. But in order to do that, he first needs to take a blood sample from one of the bodies, head whipping from left to right, between the commissioner and the vigilante finger pricking a corpse. Toga tries not to whine too loudly. He throws his hands up in the air, uncrossing his arms to shout, "Hey, guys, I'm still here. Don't leave me out of the loop." The childish display should have put a smile on the commissioner's face, but his expression becomes something much grimmer than before instead. "I'm not. I was just saving the best for last." His tone says otherwise by the sheer sense of dread that lingers on every one of his words. Even Batman redirects his attention to Tsukachi when he hears the sound of the man's voice, turning to address the vigilante. "If you're all done here." He starts to venture outside the room. "Follow me." Batman casts one last glance at the body he's taken a sample from. He notes that out of all the severed corpses, this one is only missing a foot. Then he follows Lemillion and Tsukuachi through a hole in the wall. The sheetrock is shredded and debris is littered everywhere. It was broken by some sort of blunt impact, he judges. But what really catches his eye is what's written in blood on the wall that's still intact. A riddle. "I'm something with 5 digits, but I am not a hand. When you walk along the beach, I leave prints in the sand. What could I be?" Batman's eyes narrow behind his whitened lenses as he reads the message. He had been given a riddle before, a secret case given to him by Tsukachi and Toga, and this could very well be the same perpetrator. The answer is a foot. The missing limb of the corpse he had examined is still fresh in his mind, and he doesn't think that's a coincidence. He turns around, glancing back at the lifeless body. He hadn't bothered checking it for ID, but the tech in his mask lens ought to do that for him. He soon identifies the older man as the former boss of the Yakuza before Chisaki came into power, the original head of crime, before crime was outclassed by villainy. Crime is afoot. Watching Batman closely from the corner of his eye, Commissioner Tsukachi asks the Caped Crusader, "Still think this thing was orchestrated by Toga?" The bats sleep with folded wings. Cocoons of silken darkness hang from the stalactites that occasionally drip feces into the cavern below. It's their home above the abyss, always staring down from their world turned upside down. Suddenly, the mammals are disturbed in their dwelling by the roar of an engine. The metallic machine is sleek but larger than life compared to them. It's a vehicle unlike any other, drifting into the cave as though it belongs. Some of the bats abandon their perches, but others welcome it with shrill shrieks. When the car comes to a stop and the cockpit opens, Batman climbs out. His boots thud against the floor, sound echoing throughout the space. Each footfall follows suit. Bats creep steadily along, following him from above in the shadows. Eventually, he reaches another massive machine of advanced technology. The supercomputer he had been using before going to the crime scene awaits him. He slides the tube containing the sample that he collected at the crime scene out from a pouch on his utility belt. The forensics equipment he has wired into the computer begins analyzing the gray goop, searching for compounds that match with the ones in its database. As hypothesized by the dark detective, the slime contains the same substances as the sample he collected from Himiko Toga's quirk during the Anarchy case. However, there are other chemical compounds blended in that weren't there before. Batman pulls back the top of his cowl, unmasking himself so that he can peer closer at the monitor's readout. He hums to himself as he compares the chemical concoction with an outdated drug that had been long presumed retired. There had once been a legal variant, used to prevent balding and erectile dysfunction, though it had been stopped being sold as pharmaceuticals when it was updated. Previously a booster for quirks, dubbed Trigger, it got an advanced version called Idio Trigger. The shortcoming of that variant had been losing control of one's senses, as well as the usual problem of the drug, that it eventually would wear off. However, it looks like this new version has been formatted to evolve a person's quirk and become part of the DNA rather than improve or cure in small doses. Midoriya moves from the keyboard to the green envelope containing the first riddle he had received, the riddle of the Sphinx. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, 3 legs in the evening, and no legs at night? The generic answer is a human going through the cycle of life from baby to senior, but perhaps there's more to it than that. Midoriya recalls the bloody message Toga had left him at the Yakuza's base. "I'm something with 5 digits, but I am not a hand. When you walk along the beach, I leave prints in the sand. What could I be?" The former Yakuza leader's foot being removed must mean something. 2 riddles to do with standing. Midoriya moves back to the keyboard, tapping to pull up bank records. The Yakuza had their assets transferred to an offshore account before vanishing from the server completely. Financial standing. Midoriya rubs a thumb against his chin as he contemplates the burglary. Whoever orchestrated Toga's breakout and removed the side effects of Trigger is too smart for such a small-scale crime. That can't be all the riddles mean. Midoriya becomes lost in thought as he contemplates the meaning of it all. The clues with hidden meanings have to lead him somewhere. They must have some significance. He doesn't believe it's just a wild goose chase meant to mislead him. Whoever is behind all of this truly believes themselves intellectually superior, that they're confident enough to taunt him, that cockiness will be their downfall. He's sure of it. If he can just figure out what it all means. Midoriya raises his head, drawn back to the numbers on the screen. Numbers. He grabs the letter that had been given to him by Commissioner Tsukachi, reading it again. 4 legs, 2 legs, 3 legs, no legs. The money that was transferred was done in increments. 4 grand, 2 grand, 3 grand, nothing left. The vigilante's cape trails behind him as he rushes to grab a pen and paper. The second riddle had a number 2. 5 digits. He counts on his hand, getting the 5 numbers in sequence, but then remembers the second riddle's answer was his foot and not his hand. The Yakuza leader's foot was missing. That must mean the 5 was subtracted. Midoriya racks his brain for more numbers to fill the sequence and finish the equation. Under the lead of Chisaki Kai was the 8 precepts. Subtract 5. 3 legs in the evening. They must have been killed in the evening. The time 5 or 6. Midoriya is willing to bet the number 5. He circles the number for emphasis. There's also trigger, the pharmaceutical version, idio, and now this variant. 3 legs. That can't be a coincidence. Midoriya tries various formulas with the numbers he's given, searching for a hidden code. Just when he starts to feel like he's gone too far as a conspiracy theorist, he finds a few groupings that could pass as address lines. Not wanting to kick down the door of someone innocent, he begins cross-referencing the locations, one of which is a beach house. When you walk along the beach, I leave prints in the sand. A little more research to see who owns the residence all but confirms it. Hugh Main is nothing but fabricated records, a false identity, and a cheeky one at that. A podiatrician is their profession. Their name is an alias for human. They exist solely as an answer to the riddles. The Caped Crusader pulls his mask back over his face, just as hastily as he had driven into the cave. His advanced engineered vehicle speeds out. Takoba Municipal Beach is one giant trash heap. The garbage washed in from the sea had accumulated for years and turned it into a junkyard. It makes for a revolting place that most would steer clear from going near. It also makes having a residence there all the more private. When Batman arrives at the destination, he almost misses the severed foot placed at the doormat. His eyes narrow. He doesn't have to bend down to get a better look or take a DNA sample to know it belongs to the former Yakuza boss. Knowing that he's at the right place, he pushes open the sliding glass door, only slightly shocked to find it unlocked. As for the house inside, it's empty. Batman glances around, searching for something that's not there. Not even a picture or painting hangs on any of the walls. No furniture decorates the corridors. It's a completely devoid space. He ventures deeper with another step forward. The floorboard creaks under his heavy boots. Batman pauses. He leans back from where he originally stepped. No squeak. One step forward, though, and the wood chirps. He's walking on a nightingale floor. Usually used to detect intruders in temples and palaces, certain floorboards are purposefully crafted to make sound. Only someone familiar with the layout would know where to avoid stepping. But in this particular instance, there's nobody living in the beach house. The floor must serve a different purpose. Batman glances back at the foot left by the entrance. He rereads the riddles once more in his mind. The answers, a foot in the number sequence he was given. 4, 2, 3. He stepped on the second board. Then, the third and fourth must also be rigged. Batman tentatively tests his theory, proving it true when the wood creaks. The placement is so close together that he figures something must be hidden there. Batman slides his gloved fingers into the crevices and pulls. The boards come loose easily, popping out. As suspected, the dark detective discovers a hole beneath the surface, a ladder leading down into the pit. The vigilante activates his night vision before descending into the tunnel. He climbs down one rung at a time, carefully going at a slow pace. He's not sure what to expect at the bottom, but it's certainly not something as quaint as the miniature hideout that he drops into. The underground base is more decorated than the ground level. Newspaper clippings of himself and other vigilantes or heroes adorn the walls. A coffee table at the center has a still steaming cup of tea on it, a question mark sculpted with foam. But what stands out the most is the computer array mounted in the corner. Various monitors glow green, running various versions of code and algorithms that would be difficult to solve for even the best of programmers or hackers. But at the epicenter, one of the screens awaits input. "Are you there?" A typed text flashes in the middle. Batman looks down at the keyboard below him. He taps the buttons to reply yes. When the system shuts down, he worries that he may have been too hasty. But it just as quickly reboots. The monitors flicker back to life, but illuminating a different pixelated picture. The screens collected combine like a puzzle and formulate a mirror reflection of the vigilante. Then, a set of speakers pop as they switch on next. A delighted giggle echoes before it's followed by an equally thrilled voice. "You've made it. Oh, I'm so glad. I was worried I may have made it too difficult for you." The chipper tone is soft-spoken, feminine maybe. Midoriya worries that they could even be a young child like Izumiya's anarchy. Then again, their voice could be affected by their quirk. Anything is plausible as a cause for the squeaky impishness. Batman discreetly twists a small knob on his utility belt, activating a device that'll record the room's sound to play back as audio later. Any lead is better than none. To get them talking more, he tries a direct approach by asking, "Who are you?" The disembodied voice shows a hint of amusement in its response. "Oh, come now, detective. I'm sure there are much better questions you have for me." Batman glowers at the speakers as though the mysterious enigma is hiding within them. Then again, he wasn't actually expecting an answer to that question. Instead, the vigilante tries asking, "What are you planning?" The speaker pops when the voice gets louder, the enigma likely having gotten closer to their mic. You'll see. There's a pause before they regain their earlier cheerfulness. But first, let's play another game. Recalling the massacre of the Yakuza and Toga's breakout, the vigilante feels his stomach sink. If their idea of fun is anything like the Psycho Blondes, then he must put a stop to it. This isn't a game. Batman stares at the image of himself made up of culminated computer screens. If it is, I'm winning. The carefree voice is unfazed. Batman then sees why. The screens switch to a different picture. An underground hero that he recognizes is bound and gagged to a chair in a strange contraption around their waist. The voice loses its bubbly attitude, changing into something much more ominous, and Mindjack isn't. Mindjack, the successor of Eraserhead, doesn't even look conscious. Where is he? Batman steps closer to the set of monitors in the hopes that it'll be intimidating somehow. He hadn't been expecting a hostage. The voice chuckles, yet again unaffected by the caped crusader's presence or words. This really is all just a game to them. I'll give you a hint. Their voice reverberates a little. The shy Hasekai's stronghold and here have something in common. Batman inhales a little too sharply as he suddenly remembers who he's dealing with. The Riddler is all about mind games and deception. His riddles and puzzles have answers hidden with answers. He can't lower his guard for a second by losing control of his emotions. He has to stay focused and always thinking. The dark detective recalls the Yakuza's lair when he had infiltrated it to rescue her. It too had an unassuming upper level with the true base beneath it. There had been a secret wall. Batman spins around, confronting the only wall that remained barren. He rushes over to it, rapping on the sturdy structure with his knuckles. The dull knock he gets in return has him prying the barrier back. There on the other side is a thick sheet of glass in between him and the underground hero who had been captured. When he rears back his fist to break through it, the voice pitches back in, "I would advise against that." Batman stops, cautioning himself against the warning. When the Riddler sees the vigilante awaiting further instruction, they continue. First, a riddle, Batman. Batman refrains from turning around and facing the computer screens as he listens. What's worse than biting into an apple and finding a worm? The speaker asks its question. It's an old one, like the riddle of the Sphinx. Batman says the generic answer aloud as he ponders whether that'll be the same one that the Riddler is expecting. Biting into an apple and finding half a worm. The vigilante eyes the contraption around Mindjack's waist. Strings thin enough to be invisible are connected to the glass barrier. He puts two and two together. If he shatters the shield, then the underground hero will be chopped in half. Batman keeps his fist clenched, but lowers it to be at his side. He tries to stay calm and collected as he asks, "What does Mindjack have to do with this?" "Nothing of significance," the voice says dismissively. "He's an underground hero, so he snooped into matters to do with the shy Hasekai and stumbled upon a few of my puzzles. As you can see, he's nowhere near as equal a fair opponent as you." Batman ignores the Riddler's answer, not believing it for a second. He figures he can get the true story out of the underground once he's rescued. "What do I have to do to save him?" The vigilante returns his attention to the device rigged around Mindjack. But yet again, Riddler gives an unusual response. "Nothing." Batman spins around. He hears it before he sees it. A countdown. The ticking of a bomb. Numbers flash across the monitors, lowering from 15 to 14. It's only a matter of seconds before he runs out of time. It suddenly clicks in his head what the glass barrier is for and why the underground hero will be safer if he does nothing. The glass must be blast resistant to the incoming explosion. Batman himself, however, has no such protection. The vigilante hurries to the ladder in order to escape. He knows it'll take too long to go hand over hand, so he fires his grappling hook instead. The pulley hoists him up and through the opening to the underground lair. But still, that's not fast enough. Before Batman can make it out the sliding door, the blast reaches him. His fire retardant cape takes the brunt of the explosion, protecting the vigilante from being burned too badly. But he's still thrown off balance by the force of the detonation. As the building collapses around him, he's knocked through a wall and out a window. Glass rains down on him with flickering flames and he tumbles across the sand of the beach before crashing into a pile of scrap. Midoriya coughs and clutches his side where a chunk of metal pierced his body armor. It's going to be hard to walk off that rough tumbling. But he remembers experiencing much worse when fighting Deathstroke. Still, there's sure to be a good set of new bruises in the morning. When he pushes off with his leg to stand up, he realizes just how bad a condition he's going to be in. What part of his vision isn't blurred gets obscured by colored spots. Midoriya hesitates before removing his mask. Then, he takes off a glove. He needs to feel and check for a concussion. He'll need immediate medical attention before he even makes it back to the cave. And hospitals are out of the question. That doesn't leave very many options considering who's closest to him in terms of location. He sighs before reaching into his utility belt to pull out a burner phone. The plan is to discard the rest of his suit and make up some excuse for how he got so badly injured, since Melissa Shield doesn't know about his nightly activities, and he'd like to keep it that way, even if he has no choice but to go to her for help. Midoriya is more accustomed to Kurogiri silently stitching his scars and wrapping his wounds, spare for a few snarky remarks. The reprimanding and questions were always reserved for after his bed rest, so despite her considerably valid justification for confused concern, Melissa Shield's insistent inquiries as to how he got so injured start making his head throb more than his concussion. When she dabs a disinfectant-soaked cotton ball against the sore spot, the stinging doesn't help either. He seethes through his teeth, regretting the decision to come to her for aid, even if it meant permanent brain damage. Again, he avoids giving her an actual answer. He vaguely gestures to himself, stating the obvious. I'm in bad condition and you were close by. He internally hopes that she doesn't ask him why he insisted on her lack of medical expertise over a hospital other than that, but knows better than to do that much wishful thinking. They'd already done the same song and danced such a number of times that he'd lost count. Every time, she scoffs and incredulously asks the usual rhetorical question, so you came here just because you had no other choice? Her frown deepens into a scowl, nose scrunching under her glasses that do very little to contain her glare. Finally fed up with the runaround Midoriya has been giving her since he showed up at her door covered in wounds, she asks a new question out of anger, to die or for help, nearly just as annoyed and straining to keep himself composed while in pain. Midoriya meets her gaze with a hard stare of his own. Shield bristles at his intense expression, but he just as quickly schools it and looks away apologetically. That doesn't keep the pettiness out of his tone when he responds though. Either one would have been fine. Shield slightly reels at that response, almost as though she were struck. It clearly wasn't the answer she was expecting. Her eyes fall on the blood-stained towels covering her couch which she had laid out before drifting back up to the stitched cuts from which that blood flowed. Shield's strong stare starts to soften as she returns to the same old question. Izuku, how did this happen to you? Her tone lost the edge it once had. She sounds as tired as Midoriya looks. Midoriya sighs before turning his attention back to her. The barrier he usually puts up between himself and others appears lowered to the bespectacled blonde. His green gaze holds some sort of sincerity as he chokes out, "Nothing happened to me. This wasn't some unfortunate side effect. This was a choice, a vow." He hadn't expected her to understand. Not even Kurogiri does, knowing his history and the context behind those words. Yet, it still hurts him when she shakes her head in confusion. Just once, he wishes someone would understand and stop asking questions he has no other answer to. What the hell are you talking about? Shield moves her hands from finishing his bandages to holding his. She's reaching out to him. She wants to understand, but Midoriya pulls away. He would rather lie to her than potentially get let down. He had planned to reserve his cover story for when he's right-minded but gives in to Shield's persistence. A gang of some kind mugged me. The woman sitting across from him barely contains a gasp, but he continues with the fabricated tale before she can poke any holes in it. They recognized me and thought I was carrying a fortune just because of my status. As for the deeply embedded injuries inflicted upon him over the years, he has a reason for those as well. I know you lived on an island your whole life, but in the real world, people who are quirkless make for easy targets. He hadn't meant to take a verbal jab at her, but he sees that it landed by the way she flinches. Even so, he doesn't stop just yet. If I had a normal childhood, I'm sure these type of beatings would have made me into a regular punching bag. Even if your body can handle that much abuse, it shouldn't have to. Shield shakes her head while keeping her eyes set on him. She's sure that there's a story for every crevice in his skin. She's certain that those are also accountable as the reasons why he runs his company. You think you have to hurt so others don't have to, but that just isn't true. The way he avoids making eye contact tells her that she's right. Like I said, this is a choice. His voice is so faint that it's barely a whisper. Midoriya moves slowly, meeting her gaze again, this time with a different kind of intensity. I'd rather it be me than you. There's more hurt in his eyes than his body's tremors. They've gone past the physical scars now. Memories are more traumatic, or in Midoriya's case, the lack thereof. He's aware of the absence Shield's parents had in her life too. Her mother never present on the island where she grew up, and her father arrested in her teenage years. It's not the same as watching your parents gunned down in front of you, but he feels some sort of kinship with her. Quirklessness isn't all that they have in common. They stare deeply into one another's eyes, seeing something more meaningful to each of them. Midoriya reaches over, the blonde blushing, and he removes her glasses so that he can look at the hue of her iris more clearly. In that moment, it's just the two of them. Each other is all that they can see. They're drawn towards one another, leaning closer, so close that their lips nearly meet. Suddenly, the burner phone that Midoriya had used to call S.H.I.E.L.D. starts to ring. The sudden interruption startles both of them, causing each to pull away. S.H.I.E.L.D. avoids re-establishing eye contact while Midoriya answers the phone, since it's a secure line, and only one used for his vigilante activities. Midoriya already knows who's calling without needing any caller ID. Kurogiri. Now's not the best time. His immediate answer after flicking the cell phone opens makes S.H.I.E.L.D. blush even harder. Hardly is it ever. Midoriya's caretaker snarks from the other end of the line. Pardon my concern when I saw no readout from your suit. It's not like you to go out at this time of night without it. Kurogiri's worry then slips through the tone of his voice as he explains the reason for his call. Midoriya glances at S.H.I.E.L.D. from the corner of his eye, relieved that he's the only one who can hear his butler. To her, their conversation is one-sided. It's not on me right now. Thanks for checking in, but I'm fine. He tries to keep his answer vague enough that S.H.I.E.L.D. won't decipher the meaning of his response while still conveying the essential information needed to pacify Kurogiri. Being more than acquainted with working under the employ of people living double lives, Kurogiri understands without more needing to be said. Very well. He drops the topic before moving on to ask, should I be putting Mistress Iri to bed myself then? He's asking if Midoriya will be keeping late hours. Iri must be staying up, waiting for him to return. No. Midoriya glances over at S.H.I.E.L.D. before answering, I'll be home shortly. Kurogiri lets out a breath of relief that's audible over the phone. He's supportive of the young girl's adoption and hopes for them to bond better. She'll be delighted to hear that. As hard as it is for Midoriya to manage his dual lives while simultaneously acting as a surrogate father, he can't help but share his own surrogate father's sentiment. Without so much as a goodbye, he flicks the phone closed and hangs up. It might seem rude to most, but Kurogiri understands there's not much more that would have been said anyways. Plus, it helps Midoriya to save the time he'll be needing to get back home as promised. S.H.I.E.L.D. puts her glasses back on, clearing her throat. You should spend the rest of the night here. She starts collecting the towels covering the couch in an attempt to tidy the place up a bit, but Midoriya has already made the committed promise to head home. He stands up, shaking his head. That wouldn't be appropriate for co-workers, would it? S.H.I.E.L.D. goes back to blushing, nearly dropping the towels that she collected. That's not what I meant. Her glasses slide down the bridge of her nose as she looks away in embarrassment. Midoriya hides his smile by sliding a shirt over his head. He knows full well that she only made the suggestion out of concern for his health, but he couldn't resist a flirtatious joke. Sorry, but I can't. He keeps up the attitude with a wink. Maybe next time though. To those unaccustomed with his true self, this is just his typical behavior. The playboy philanthropist act is something he must keep up from time to time to avoid suspicion. It also helps him to redirect S.H.I.E.L.D.'s attention from questioning him about his injuries again or the phone call. And it works. S.H.I.E.L.D. is much too flustered to form a response, let alone think straight. Midoriya uses the opportunity to slip away without being further interrogated, only making time to briefly thank her for patching him up. He's sure that he hasn't gotten away with it completely, but at least he's able to prolong providing her with any more false answers. When he returns to the cave, he leaves his suit in the car for Kurogiri to fish out. He hadn't left his laundry strewn around since he was a child, but he's in a bit of a rush tonight. Midoriya had been taught not to keep a girl waiting, and Iri is a very special one. He buttons up a long-sleeved shirt on his way to her room, wanting to conceal his injuries and bandages. That includes hiding the patch on his head by pushing down his bangs. Midoriya lightly knocks on her door before entering. When he does, he's relieved to see she didn't fall asleep waiting for him. She's still awake, book in hand to occupy her mind. He offhandedly wonders if the shy Hasakai had allowed her to read when she was in captivity. She certainly took a liking to the Manor's private library that it wouldn't hurt to assume. Kurogiri said you wanted to see me before bed. He broaches the territory with hesitance. He's still not figured out how to act around her. Having not had a childhood of his own, growing up much sooner than most kids doesn't give him any understanding of the youth, let alone how to be a proper parent to an adoptive daughter. Though that doesn't stop him from trying as best as he can. Iri slides a Battle Fist-themed bookmark into the pages of her novel before closing it. Once she sets it aside, her bright red eyes redirect themselves to her green-haired guardian. He didn't tell you why, did he? That same bushy-haired father figure is taken aback by the pout that the young girl gives him. Shaking his head, no. Midoriya voices his confusion. Iri's mouth suddenly shifts to a giddy grin, surprising the self-proclaimed detective even further. Just as the vigilante on his off hours starts rethinking the capability of his deductive abilities, he realizes what day it is. Iri tosses her covers and blankets off, jumping from the bed into his arms. I did it. I got in. She squeals with delight while squeezing his waist with her tiny arms. Midoriya returns her hug, matching her enthusiasm with an equally thrilled smile. With all that happened tonight, he had nearly forgotten Iri's entrance exam to UA had taken place during the same day. I knew you would. I'm so proud of you. He recalls the mild training regime that he and Kirigiri had given her in preparation for the test and truly means those words based on how she performed. After being rescued from captivity, Iri had wanted to pursue heroics and save others like herself. It doesn't take a parent to know she had to do so the legal way. While Batman may not be the best leading example for her, that's the whole point. The Dark Knight is there so no kid has to be like him ever again. Adopting Iri was for that same reason. Midoriya wanted to make sure she wouldn't share the same fate he had. She deserves better, and he hopes that she can get that brighter future at UA. But as he holds her close and thinks of the prestigious hero school, he also finds himself thinking of its principal, a mastermind with a questionably sinister side, who enjoys tea. The dark detective can't help but be slightly suspicious that there's no such thing as coincidence. It's a hunch, possibly a reach as a suspect, but he can't rule it out. Midoriya is relieved that Iri can't see his smile slip by still clinging onto him as he says, I was hoping to have a chat with the school's principal anyways. The elevator ride is so smooth that its single passenger becomes lost in thought, without any notion that he's descending at all. Izuku Midoriya, owner of the company building, leans against the cubicle's back wall with one hand in a pocket and the other holding an envelope. Ordinarily, the boss wouldn't be carrying or delivering his own request form. However, what's enclosed is much too sensitive a matter to be passed off to a careless secretary. Midoriya is only willing to entrust Mei Hatsune with what's written inside, the woman he's heading down to the lower levels of Midoriya Enterprises to meet with. As he waits, his mind wanders and thinks of the inventor under his employ. Without knowing it, she had created a vast margin of the gadgets and equipment he uses as Batman. He had considered sharing his secret with her, since the two had gotten relatively close, but decided against it. She's so consumed with her work that the reveal would probably go over her head anyways. Still, he can't help but be grateful for all the aid she's provided. She's a hard worker that he doesn't want to take for granted. As a matter of fact, Hatsune has her own personal development studio separate from the others, upon request. It's a basement reinforced with a white metallic alloy, save for the black soot and ashes from explosions. But that's exactly the reason why the floor is crafted out of the special material. There, she can make inventions all day and night to her heart's content. When Midoriya arrives on the floor and steps off the elevator, he expects to find her still welding away at something. What he finds instead is another woman who has been on his mind as equally often. Melissa Shield, wearing a blazer and pencil skirt, surveys the development studio with a clipboard in her hand. Melissa, the surprise of seeing her where he doesn't expect to slips through his mouth. The blonde turns to face him, as equally shocked to be encountering one another again so soon. What are you doing here? Midoriya asks, forgetting that she works alongside him for his company now. Running a maintenance check. Shield shows him the clipboard by turning it over so he can read the manuscript. It's mandatory. She pauses and then asks him back, what are you doing here? Realizing that he's holding an envelope in his hand and that the blonde is eyeing it, Midoriya weighs it a bit like it's an option to acknowledge or not. I just came to drop something off. He replies a little too vaguely, though purposely. When Shield raises a brow, he shrugs in an attempt to avoid suspicion. The first lie that comes to mind is the excuse that he runs with. It was getting a little stuffy in my office and I like to check up on my employees. Unbeknown to the quirkless woman, the real reason that Midoriya stopped by Hatsune's studio was for a personal request. After taking damage from the Riddler's bomb trap, and then its wearer reflecting on all the times it didn't hold up in combat against opponents like Deathstroke, it was determined that the armor which Batman wears requires an upgrade. Specifications, modifications, and requirements are listed in the letter that he wrote for the inventor. For that reason, it's for Hatsune's eyes only. Midoriya is much too paranoid that somebody else would be able to put two and two together if they get their hands on the envelope instead. Shield tucks a stray strand of hair behind her ear, playing coy as she teases, "You never check up on me." Had Midoriya not adopted a playboy personality and charm, he would have been reduced to a blushing and stammering mess. Fortunately, he's had years to grow up and mature. The only one blushing is the blonde herself. Midoriya fixes her with a teasing glance, but replies with a completely deadpan tone, "We saw each other just last night." Shield matches the half-joking and half-stoic energy with her response, "You were bleeding all over my couch," which gets Midoriya to huff, just barely on the brink of an actual laugh. Shield's eyes widen behind her glasses. It's a rarity to see him genuinely amused. Her blush deepens, further allured by his natural charm more than the facade he puts on. "I'll make it up to you one of these times," Midoriya half-heartedly promises. Not wanting the vow to become an empty promise, Shield attempts to seize the opportunity by asking, "How about tonight?" Midoriya startles, doing a double take. Shield elaborates on the suggestion. hoping to convince him while he's caught off guard. Would you like to come over? This time for dinner. I wish I could, but Midoriya stammers as he processes the request and mulls over his plans for the night. Even if his mission as Batman weren't in the way, he has other arrangements. Midoriya remembers his appointment with Erie's principal. I've got a meeting elsewhere after this and I'm not sure how long it'll run. Shield lowers her head in disappointment, averting her gaze from Midoriya and to the clipboard in her hands. Midoriya, seeing her downtrodden demeanor and sulking expression, feels a tug at his heart. So, hoping to make it up to her, he returns to the half-hearted promise and makes it full. I'll take you up on that offer some other time though, if it's ever still on the table. He gives her a sincere smile to let her know he means it. Hearing him, Shield glances up from her clipboard. When she sees his smile, she becomes flustered. Oh, of course. Diverting her gaze once more, she tries hiding her blush with the clipboard. I don't mind waiting. Relieved that she's no longer upset and willing to give him a chance, Midoriya lets out a small sigh. Thanks for being patient with me. I know I'm a hard sell. He internally wonders if she'd still be smitten if she knew just how true that statement was. Shield laughs, taking the comment as a joke. Ew, no way. The blonde shakes her head as she sizes him up and down with her eyes. She doesn't need glasses to see that he's handsome and physically well-defined. Other women seem to think so too. I know, right? Look at these beefy arms. Hatsune materializes out of seemingly nowhere to grab Midoriya's biceps, giving them a firm squeeze. The inventor gawps. Whoa, did they get beefier? Her salmon-pink dreadlocks sway with the motion of her circling him as she exclaims, Hunka hunka. Seeing how taken aback Shield is, Midoriya stops Hatsune in her tracks by whacking her on the head with the envelope in his hand. No sucking up to the boss. He takes a step back so that she'll stop groping his muscles, just for extra measure. Undeterred by his response, the hyperactive grease monkey pauses only to lock onto the envelope, her quirk zooming in on it. What's this? Hatsune snatches the letter from Midoriya before ripping it open and asking, a new project. A private project. Keep it under wraps. You know the drill. Midoriya shoots a quick glance in Shield's direction that he hopes only Hatsune will notice. Sure. The inventor extraordinaire waves the request off before making her own with that same hand outstretching to be given something. Bring me my tools. Rather than oblige, he brushes off her demand in return. Midoriya glances down at the open palm before heading for the exit. I'm going to that meeting now. But my tools. Hatsune calls after him with a pleading tone. When the pinkette turns towards Shield, the blonde follows after Midoriya. Mind if I join you for the ride up at least? She walks alongside him just before reaching the elevator. Not at all. Midoriya presses the call button for them to leave. Seeing that neither of her visitors are going to be of any help, Hatsune huffs and crosses her arms. Fine, I'll get them myself. The inventor whines only a little before getting to work. With one meeting down, it's on to the next. Midoriya waits for Kirigiri to chauffeur, prepared to meet UAS principal. Formerly a graduate from Seai Academy, Seiko Intelli had replaced her predecessor on the school board. Her intellect had made her a perfect candidate closely comparable to UAS first principal. That intelligence is also what makes her a suspect in the Riddler case. Intelli's quirk, IQ, is essentially that her brain capacity increases when drinking tea. Considering the Riddler's lair had a cup of tea present, it's not too far of a reach to suspect her. There's also the Riddler's voice. It was high enough a pitch to be feminine and Intelli is female. The detective in Midoriya can't help but want to follow the potential lead to wherever it may go. He also figures that even if Intelli winds up being a false lead, at least he'll have had a meeting with Erie's principal. For the little girl's sake, he hopes that Intelli is innocent. Then again, the sooner he catches whoever the Riddler is, the more lives he'll be able to save. With Himiko Toga involved, the risk factor is very high. He can't imagine the danger level she's reached with her recent quirk evolution. When Midoriya finally arrives at UA, he's more on guard than ever. Only actually being on the campus does he fully realize the extremity of the situation if it turns out to be true. A villain would have infiltrated Japan's most prestigious hero school. He can't imagine why, if not other than to run it into the ground and damage hero society. The status quo and position would allow her access to areas no other villain would be able to step foot at without breaking and entering. Unless, of course, that villain could morph or shapeshift into somebody else like Toga can. Two extremely dangerous psychopaths with power in more ways than one. He feels pressed for time to stop them more than ever. As soon as the large pair of French doors swing open, he's greeted by the principal in her office. Ah, Mr. Midoriya, I've been expecting you. Please, have a seat and relax. She gestures to the chair across from her before asking, would you like a cup of tea? Midoriya glances at the tea, already suspecting it of being drugged or laced with poison. No, thank you. He denies the offer before also doubting the chair. He remembers the contraption that Mindjack had been strapped to. And I think I'd rather stand. I won't be taking too much of your time anyways. Besides, he figures he can inspect the room better without being confined to a seat. Intelli purses her lips as she watches him examine her trophy case. Oh, but isn't there much to discuss about your adoptive daughter? Hearing the mention of Eri has Midoriya glancing back in her direction. If she is who he suspects, the instinct to protect the little girl isn't misplaced. What about her? He tries to be subtle about the clenching of his fists at his sides, but wouldn't be surprised if the principal notices. Intelli tilts her head, seemingly mulling over Midoriya's reaction as much as her own response. It's my job to read up on my prospective students. Eri is quite the remarkable young lady. The principal shuffles a few papers on her desk that must be related to her. Still protective of the girl that he's taken in, Midoriya turns to face Intelli. Shouldn't her studies be left to her teachers? He presses the issue just a bit to see her reaction. Intelli doesn't waver. She simply shrugs before answering. Well, yes, but then there would be no need for a principal if I didn't do my own part. Midoriya's eyes narrow in suspicion. She's dancing around the subject and not giving any clear answers. He's not sure if it's paranoia, but he doesn't want to take any chances when it's Eri involved. And what exactly is your part? His eyes land on a chessboard that also occupies the desk. He remembers the Riddler calling their crimes a game, which may very well make everyone pieces on the board. Midoriya stares at the pawns lined up on either side. What do you make of your students? That gets Intelli to frown just a smidge. She tries to school her expression, hiding it behind a cup of tea as she takes a sip. Once she sets the cup down, she wears a fake smile. You know, I also research parents. Her eyes meet Midoriya's, quirkless and orphaned. Do you resent UA, Mr. Midoriya? Or perhaps heroes in general? It's Midoriya's turn to frown. She's trying to hit a nerve. An eye for an eye. All that she's doing is further increasing his suspicions of her being the Riddler. This isn't about me. This meeting is about you. Intelli hums before asking. Not about your adoptive daughter. Midoriya tenses when she then stands up and continues. Mr. Midoriya, you're well aware of Eri's history, are you not? And what's become of the shy Hasekai? He wasn't expecting her to be so direct. Bringing up the Yakuza only confirms it. He's about to retort when the dual doors behind him swing open. A familiar face enters the room, one that he hadn't been expecting. Izuku Midoriya. Naomasa Tsukachi addresses Midoriya directly as he strides further forward. Commissioner. Midoriya turns to face the head of the police department. He sees that Tsukachi is carrying a set of handcuffs with him. Perhaps Mindjack or somebody else figured out the Riddler's identity too. He thinks, but then Tsukachi is roughly grabbing Midoriya and spinning him around. Please put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for suspicion of first-degree murder and kidnapping. The cuffs latch around Midoriya's wrists as he's taken into custody. What? Midoriya tries looking over his shoulder to see Tsukachi and get some kind of explanation, but his gaze is drawn away when he hears Intelli giggling. Intelli smirks as she steps around her desk. Did you really think you would keep your secret from me, Mr. Midoriya? Her eyes glimmer as they meet his and his widen. The possibility that she thought ahead and figured out his identity starts to register. Intelli then moves the White Queen in front of the Black Knight, claiming, checkmate. The room that Izuku Midoriya currently occupies is as plain as his appearance, consisting only of Spartan furniture and a recorder the same way Midoriya's green hair may mildly stand out. Each chair is chained on either side of a table that's bolted to the floor, but Midoriya hasn't so much as squirmed in his seat to be quite as shackled down. The absence of a two-way mirror or a video camera in any of the room's four corners doesn't make the ensuing interaction any less of an interrogation, though. A steel door pushes open, Commissioner Naomasa Tsukachi coming into the small space. He doesn't enter the room alone. Behind him is Sansa Tamakawa, recently appointed lieutenant at the precinct. Tamakawa carries a small old-school television box set and Tsukachi holds a handful of manila folders, until each policeman places their stuff on the table. Midoriya raises an eyebrow, but doesn't say anything. There's handcuffs still bound to his wrists. And nobody has yet to explain the reason for his arrest, but he still remains cooperatively quiet. The lieutenant with the head of a ginger tabby cat glances in Midoriya's direction before leaving the room and closing the steel door behind himself. Now just Tsukachi and Midoriya. The commissioner sits down across from the detained. He takes a moment to flip open one of the folders on the table, looking inside for himself, and then presses a button on the recorder. Mr. Midoriya, do you know why you're here? Tsukachi closes the folder and looks up to address the man across from him. His rectangular eyes are set in a hard stare behind the frame of his glasses. Despite having racked his brain about it for the past few hours, Midoriya genuinely doesn't. Or, at least, he hopes he doesn't know. The thought had crossed his mind that a connection was made between him and his acts of vigilantism as Batman. But even so, he and the commissioner are on relatively good relations that he wouldn't expect to be arrested if that were the case. So he shakes his head and answers honestly, no. Could you please explain what's going on, Commissioner? Tsukachi's lie-detecting quirk lets him know that Midoriya is telling the truth, so he obliges. The television that Tamakawa carried in gets turned on so that it can play a tape. In considerably good quality and clear-colored picture, the screen shows what looks like Izuku Midoriya shaking hands with Kanjiro Okita at the Iceberg Lounge. Formerly Jurin and now known as Penguin, it seems as though he is in the company of a criminal. Already, Midoriya is putting together the puzzle pieces to what he's seeing and why he was taken into custody instead of Intelli. The person he's seeing on the television must be Himeko Toga posing as him. It's quite possible that with the aid of Trigger and her quirk evolution, she no longer needs a person's DNA to match their appearance. Toga had good relations with Penguin during the time of the League of Villains when he was Jurin, so it must have been easy to set up a meeting and frame him as Izuku Midoriya. We haven't been able to get a hold of your flightless feathered friend, but that sure does look like you speaking with him. Tsukachi pauses the video but keeps the television on as he applies more pressure to his accusation. Your reputation as it is doesn't make it all that surprising you'd be hanging out in a nightclub, but you certainly chose the wrong one. The accused waves a cuffed hand in denial. I've never shared company with that man. Not as Izuku Midoriya anyways, he thinks. As a businessman, or anything else for that matter, I will never associate myself with or make dealings with people of that stature. The fabricated footage says otherwise, but Midoriya knows he has a chance of getting his name cleared so long as Tsukachi's quirk registers his words as truth. The commissioner does hesitate, but only momentarily. Tsukachi opens the folder in front of him and slides a set of papers across the table for Midoriya to read. That's not what your company's records say. The documents date back to when his father was alive. Midoriya takes them in his hand, peering closer at the details. Hisashi Midoriya had worked with some shady people in the past. Not to mention one of the few he hired is still under your employ. Tsukachi studies Midoriya as intently as Midoriya studies the pages that he's holding. Could the apple have not fallen far from the tree? Who? Midoriya falters as he reads the name of his caretaker. Kurogiri had been associated with some less than legal characters, and so had his father apparently. The paper trail and the reason for his wealth suddenly starts to make sense. The reason why his father had left for America was to flee the country of Japan and stay out of their legal jurisdiction, not just because of a business opportunity. Witnessing the distraught range of emotions in Midoriya's facial expressions, Tsukachi starts to reconsider his initial judgment. You didn't know, did you? He comes to his own realization as he watches Midoriya slouch in his seat. No, I didn't. Midoriya mumbles a weak whisper. Internally, he's falling apart. He starts to question what his life mission is all about. He had dedicated himself to being Batman for the sake of his family, and now he's finding out that they were involved in the very same crime he swore to fight. The paper in his hand crumples as his grip tightens on it. I'm sorry. Tsukachi leans back in his chair as he gauges Midoriya's sincerity. Becoming just as despondent, he replies with his own share of sympathy. I didn't realize that this would all come as a shock to you. Midoriya stares at the papers that he's holding, still not quite believing what he's read over and over. Eventually, he raises his head to shift his gaze from them to Tsukachi and asks, how did you find all of this out? When you enrolled Eri at UA, Intelli uncovered some rather unsavory details pertaining to both Eri and yourself. Tsukachi adjusts his glasses as he recomposes himself. He's reminded of the case at hand and puts aside any condolences for the time being. Reminded of the pro-hero and principal, he realizes that she truly was only doing her job. He clears her of suspicion, also realizing how suspicious he must have seemed to her as well. She was only looking out for Eri. It starts to make sense to him now that he knows she was the one to gather research on the Yakuza investigation coupled with Eri's adoption. Tsukachi can practically see the gears and cogs spinning in Midoriya's mind over the revelation. After discovering it was actually his own family and guardian who were the bad guys, the commissioner deems it necessary to remind Midoriya that not everyone is corrupted by the system, Mr. Midoriya. Midoriya's eyes focus on Tsukachi as he takes those words in. Swallowing and then smiling the faintest of smiles, he nods. No, not everyone. Midoriya agrees. Realizing that Midoriya is staring at him, Tsukachi clears his throat and breaks the eye contact. Even though I'd like to say this has all been resolved, there's still a few concerns that I'd like to go over with you. He pauses before regaining his composure a second time. As a matter of fact, you may have presented me with more questions than answers now. Somebody's posing as me. Midoriya starts with the most prominent one. He gestures with his head towards the television monitor where his doppelganger and Penguin are on screen. He can't exactly come out and accuse Toga since he as Izuku wouldn't know of her, but he can at least put Tsukachi on the right warpath. Registering the explanation as truth, Tsukachi hums. Whether Midoriya merely believes that wholeheartedly or actually knows for certain he's been set up, he doesn't know. So he asks any reason as to why. Midoriya sits up straight and shrugs as he considers the possibilities of motive. Aside from my family's fortune or my reputation, I think I'll need to take extra precautionary measures so that nobody can walk into my company building wearing my face and then back out with any of the equipment we're developing. Sukachi nods as he mulls over the countless possibilities. Yes, I guess though a concern, we can consider that pure coincidence with our other revelations. He puts the matter aside since it doesn't correlate or connect with the other issues, and moves on to the next. And what about Kurogiri? At that one, Midoriya falters. Reminded of the betrayal and secrets, his posture hunches. He practically raised me. Midoriya reflects on what very little of a childhood that he had and how he owes it to his surrogate father. Kurogiri had taught him how to shave, how to cook and clean, even how to defend himself and fight. There was never any indication that he would be. What did he do? Midoriya can't keep the subjectivity out of his voice. Sukachi watches Midoriya closely from behind the frames of his glasses. Nothing without enough evidence for us to have brought him in with you. He can see how much of an internal battle the man is having over the matter. You're taking this rather hard, I imagine. Can you leave him to me? Maybe I can get a confession or... Midoriya jumps at the chance that Kurogiri could be innocent. Or maybe it's all a big misunderstanding. That has to be it. But there's also a side to him that waits in the shadows, a side that knows the truth and has already accepted it, a side that seems familiar to the commissioner but can't be placed. I don't think this is something we can easily allow to fall under the radar. Sukachi suddenly wishes he had a hot mug of coffee for this conversation to go down a little easier. But I can be tolerant of the fact that you're willing to help detrimentally. He's not sure how to broach the situation otherwise, so he gives Midoriya an olive branch. Thank you. Midoriya takes what he can get and nods gratefully. He then gestures to the documents spilled out across the table in front of him. I'd also like a copy of these forms. I think it's only right that I return some of these funds to their rightful owners. Sukachi blinks in surprise before nodding with mock appreciation. Your lawyers and whatnot should be able to handle the legal jargon for you, but that sounds like a good move. But Midoriya shakes his head, emphasizing it's not for PR. I'd give up every last dime if it meant setting things straight. Surprised again, Sukachi is at a loss for words. After a moment, he smiles and gives a small bow as a sign of respect. You're a better person than I took you for, Mr. Midoriya. Midoriya's eyes widen when he realizes his reputation doesn't mesh well with his current lack of performance. The playboy philanthropist act may be falling apart. He scratches behind his ear while feigning a laugh. Well, having a daughter now makes it a little easier to move on from being a womanizer. It's a lame excuse, but it's one he can only hope the commissioner buys. Reminded of the young girl that Midoriya adopted, Sukachi's smile falls away. Yes, that brings us to Eri. I have several questions about her. He's returned to his serious demeanor and leans forward to hear what the girl's guardian has to say. I meant what I said. I didn't have shading dealings with the Yakuza or any other criminal organization, ever. Midoriya matches the energy with his own serious state, which reassures the commissioner. I was just making sure. He lets out a sigh of relief that his quirk told him Midoriya was telling the truth with that statement, but that sigh quickly turns into one of exasperation. Well, it looks like I'm back to square one when it comes to who wiped them out. Midoriya raises a single brow at that. He can't help but want to laugh at the prospect of him taking out the entire Shai Hasekai, with his training and gadgets or not. I appreciate your confidence in the quirkless. It can't keep the amusement out of his tone. Coming to the same humorous conclusion, Sukachi hides his embarrassment. Good point. Only worsening it when he does a double take and realizes what he said. I didn't mean to sound discriminatory. No offense taken. But Midoriya graciously waves it off. Getting back on topic, Sukachi shifts in his seat to get comfortable. So, mind telling me how you came under the care of Eri then? He levels his gaze with Midoriya's. Immediately, Midoriya averts his eyes. Ooh, I'm not sure how much I'm able to disclose. He carefully considers what he wants to share since he's limited to lying due to the commissioner's quirk, and eventually settles on. It's actually a shared custody sort-of thing. A former licensed hero performed a rescue opus and then asked me to take her in. I guess she thought I'd make a good candidate because of my past. Registering all of that as the truth, Sukachi nods along. He tilts his head and asks, I take it you're unable to share a name. Midoriya hesitates. He doesn't want to get Shirotoko into any trouble. Do I have to? He keeps avoiding eye contact in hopes that the commissioner won't push the issue. Turns out, he doesn't really have to. You said former licensed hero. Does that mean this person is operating as a vigilante now? Sukachi begins drawing his own conclusions instead. I don't really know what the legal situation is, but maybe. Midoriya shrugs as he tries to keep his answer as vague as possible. Considering her past and quirklessness, the response isn't exactly a lie. Not to mention her relative retirement. Fair enough. I won't pry. Sukachi sighs in surrender before relaxing in his chair. Well, Mr. Midoriya, it seems Eri is in good care and your story checks out despite a few hang-ups. You're clear of any charges and free to go. Standing up to take his leave, Midoriya thanks the commissioner and wishes him a good night. Tamakawa opens the door and the exonerated goes home. Though, free to walk the world doesn't equate to being free of his own mind. He has a lot to think about after learning the truth of his father's fortune and Kirigiri's employment. If Kirigiri had known the whole time, he wonders about his mother. It sends him into a spiral. When he does return to the manor, he goes straight beyond it into the cave. There, he's able to conduct more research on himself and his family using the supercomputer built into the depths. He looks back through all the records Intel he found and relays them with what Tsukachi copied for him. Then he cross-references the documents with what only he is capable of accessing from his own company. It's laundered money, blood money, dirty cash. He considers following what must also be a paper trail but ultimately decides it can wait for later. There are much more pressing matters, such as the ever-elusive Enigma Riddler whose identity is still unknown. The only clue he's got now is what must have been Himiko Toga massacring as him in the Iceberg Lounge. It's a lead he'll have to follow and uncover more information on. The horn, cowl, and cape beckons him to go in like a bat out of hell. But he again decides to unravel the mystery a little more first. The face of Izuku Midoriya is needed for once. He throws on a black coat, pulling the hood over his head. Just as he's about to ride out on a motorcycle, Kirigiri enters the vehicle bay. He stops. Seeing the accused caretaker freezes him like a deer in headlights. Kirigiri is just short of being frantic as he asks, "Sir, where have you been? Your secretary called, and Eri has been asking for you." Midoriya can only hear the concern in his butler's voice. He can't hear the supposed criminal that Tsukachi claimed Kirigiri to be. Realizing that his caretaker is still waiting on an answer, he fixes his head forward on the runway to leave. "Am I not allowed to have my secrets, Kirigiri?" It's a subtle jab at the lie he's been told his entire life that he eventually responds with, "I beg your pardon." Kirigiri doesn't understand in the slightest. The purple wisp of smoke that makes up his body tilts in a shape that inquiries an explanation. Unsure of what Eri told him or if Kirigiri is even aware of his being detained, Midoriya brushes it all off by saying, "Tell the board they'll be able to save whatever money they'll have left by removing my chair. The rest can go to funding a dorm at UA for Eri." Even more baffled, Kirigiri's yellow slants broaden in shock. "Sir, Izuku, I don't understand. Why are..." He's cut off by the sharp intake of a fuel-injected engine. The growl of the motorcycle overtakes his words. "Because there is no Izuku Midoriya." "But not the bike's riders. What are you saying?" Kirigiri starts to reach out to stop Midoriya from riding off but stops short when he sees the man's expression. "Izuku Midoriya is a mask I wear, that I've been wearing since I was a child. But it's become a liability, so it's over now." His face and tone is a lot like the night he made a vow to become Batman. He's devoted to a cause, to his mission, afraid of losing the boy he barely managed to keep alive after the shooting that night long ago, who may as well have also been shot. Kirigiri takes a step forward. You can't possibly mean that." But what he sees in front of him is shadowed by the hood being worn. The hooded figure of who that boy became looks away. "I do. Izuku Midoriya and his troubles aren't my concern anymore." His gaze fixed forward on the cave's mouth where bats fly out to roam the night. "Where does that leave us?" Kirigiri silently pleads for him not to go. "You have your job. Do it." But the man that the boy has become is cold and distant. Reminded of the boy's father and his other employer before then, Kirigiri begins to panic. He wanted to keep the boy from growing into something awful such as them. Aside that Kirigiri had almost forgotten of himself, perhaps a past life, had intended to help the boy become a hero and not a villain. "No, us, you and me. If there is no Izuku Midoriya, then who did I care for? Who did I raise? Can you answer me that?" He keeps stepping closer and extends his arms for a hug. Before he can wrap his arms around the one he cared for, he's again stopped. "I'm leaving now. Whatever is left of Izuku Midoriya stays up in that manor." By the roar of the engine that leaves the cave, raindrops fall to bequeath a blacktop street. Ripples in the dark giving the surface an unsturdy appearance. Each footfall from the lone hooded figure occupying the stretch of road stays afloat anyways, grounded atop the blackened base. Those same rain droplets seemingly float, gentle to tap the being who strides in the night. In the glow of a burning street lamp, the specks are as invisible as he in the darkness. The living shadow stops at the Iceberg Lounge, only unveiling the hood to reveal himself when he's greeted at the door. Izuku Midoriya stares up at a reptilian man double his size and stature. He recognizes the nomified bouncer as Killer Croc, formerly a guard dog at the docks. He figures Penguin changed Agucha's position after he and Shirotoko brought him down the first time. The grotesque mutation has continued to develop since their last encounter, it seems. The desaturated purple hair he once had has all fallen out, or perhaps been shaved, replaced by a scaly skull. Parietal eyes glower at Midoriya from the greater height as Aguchi sniffs the air. Agucha's gaze fixates on Midoriya as he inhales, pointed teeth shaped into a snarl. "Your scent. It's familiar." Midoriya's own eyes widen as he realizes Killer Croc can recognize his scent. He's unsure of whether or not the nomified attack dog will be capable of putting two and two together that he's Batman. But he instantly adds to the list of his worries that Croc may also smell the fear he's excreting. That's because I was here before. Midoriya acts quickly and decisively takes a gamble that Toga had crossed Croc's path while masquerading as him, continuing to put up a front with that excuse. He also tries to make their interaction as brief as possible. I'm back for the same reason, to meet with your boss. But Midoriya's words fall on deaf ears. Iguchi is still sniffing the aroma that only he can identify specifically. Smell, you smell like. His mismatched mind works slowly to place the scent, but it's intent on solving the mystery. Feigning a laugh, Midoriya tries to play it off with a joke next. I thought the rain would help substitute for a shower, but I guess that was a mistake. His nervous chuckle doesn't do much to convince the imposing figure of Killer Croc, but it does distract him momentarily. The interaction is drawn out long enough for another door manager to step in. What's the holdup here? A man with spiky turquoise hair and a goatee pushes past Iguchi to have a look for himself. Well, recognizing Izuku Midori, his previously disgruntled demeanor shifts to something a little brighter. As I live and breathe, if it isn't Izuku Midori. He quickly shifts back to form in order to snap at his much larger associate though. Let him through, dumbass. A low growl comes from Croc, who it's directed at unclear. He does, however, step aside. Midoriya hurries past to get into the club, not wasting the opportunity. Now with the aid of neon lights, Midoriya recognizes the second door guard as Soga Kujisaki. In the world of vigilantes prior to his own time, Kujisaki had quite a record. Even for somebody involved in the underworld, he can't help but wonder how the man came into Penguin's employ. Don't mind him. He gets cranky if he doesn't eat often. Kujisaki flaps his hand over his shoulder to wave off Iguchi's unspoken threat, though Midoriya takes it very seriously, considering Croc has a valid reason to make good on it should he come to identify his scent. Is it really a good idea to have a guy like that guarding the door? Midoriya makes an act of seeming anxious by glancing behind himself every now and then. Kujisaki shrugs, shoving his hands into the pockets of his pants. It keeps the riffraff out at least. He side-eyes Midoriya with a raised brow when adding, "Don't tell me you're a quirkist." Never. Midoriya quickly shoots down the suggestion. In reality, he used to be a quirk fanatic. Growing up quirkless, all I ever wanted was a quirk of my own. That desire had only increased exponentially after his parents died. He wishes he had a quirk to have saved them. Remembering the recent revelation of their criminal records though, maybe it's better off that he didn't. Midoriya surprises himself with that thought, a sharp pang to his heart as he immediately regrets thinking it. I can only imagine. Kujisaki considers Midoriya's childhood for a moment before sighing and opening up a little too. Well, quirks aren't all as great as they're cut out to be either. Take it from me. He takes the lead instead of walking side by side when taking Midoriya down a hall. I guess it wasn't easy for anyone growing up in our era. Midoriya mutters more to himself than to Kujisaki, though Kujisaki hears it anyways. He glances over his shoulder to reply, and I doubt it'll get any easier. Then they reach the door to an office. Welp, here we are. You and the boss seemed acquainted enough, so I'll leave you to it. It's the office of the Penguin. Midoriya watches Kujisaki walk away while giving a small bow. Thanks. He hesitates to knock on the door. Who is it? But it swings open on its own, an angry nightclub owner behind it. Though his scowl shifts to delight upon seeing his company, Mr. Midoriya. Don't be shy, come on in. Okuda waddles with his weight to a built-in minibar where he asks and offers, what brings you by? Care for a cigar? A drink, perhaps? No thanks, I'll pass on both. Midoriya waves them off before closing the door behind himself. I just wanted to make sure you're making good on our deal is all. He'd rather get straight to the point and keep the visit short. Mr. Midoriya, you wound me. Really, I'm hurt. Okuda makes a show of acting injured by placing his hand over his heart. It's the same hand Midoriya had broken when he paid Penguin a visit as Batman. I am a legitimate businessman. I always make good on my end of the bargain, especially when being paid as handsomely well as you're putting out. He chuckles to himself as though what he said is funny. You know I'm good for the money. Midoriya squints at Okuda as he waits patiently for information, though the glare isn't quite as effective without his mask. I don't expect your company to go under any time soon, that's for sure. Okuda continues cackling at his own joke. When he sees that Midoriya isn't laughing along, he simmers down and turns serious. Not to worry. I've got exactly what you want. I was gonna send it to the PO box you gave me, but since you're already here, Midoriya's intrigue provokes him to ask about the PO box mentioned. But he knows that it'd be too suspicious considering he's meant to be the same person Toga pretended to be. So instead, he subtly tries a different approach to extract other intel. And you've already been paid by my people, right? Okuda nods in affirmation. You have some reliable little workers. Yes, sir. I do believe we have conducted our business together rather well. Just making sure. Midoriya tries to keep any growl out of his voice, but he's finding it increasingly difficult in Okuda's company. Okuda withholds a USB he's brandished. That must be what Toga impersonated to gain. Though, there is one wee little hang-up that's bugging me. He uses it as a bargaining chip for whatever it is that he's referring to. Oh, and what's that? Midoriya restrains himself from sounding too surprised. He wasn't expecting there to be a catch or to come so close to acquiring what Toga and her accomplice wanted before they could get their hands on it. Well, you know I don't like to pry. There's no reason for me to go poking my beak into other people's business by asking questions. But there's something extra shady about what it is you're coming to me for. Okuda thumbs the USB as he looks it over for himself. His monocle is like a microscope being used to study it. How so? Midoriya takes a step closer as he's further drawn into the deal that his impersonator had with Penguin. Look, I don't mean any ill treatment. I'm just curious as to what a guy like you wants with UAS records. Midoriya involuntarily reacts in shock at that revelation. Already, he's reconnecting threads and ties to Intelli and UA as he considers various probabilities. Could it have to do with that little girl you took under your wing? But Okuda comes to his own conclusion based on Midoriya's reaction. Midoriya snaps out of his thoughts upon hearing Eri mentioned, glare hardening on Penguin. He doesn't bother keeping the gravelly growl out of his voice as he says, leave her out of your mouth. Okuda's mouth morphs into a toothy grin, the gap between his teeth showing through. Oh, touched a nerve there. But what sort of gentlemen are we if we can't keep our composure? He holds up his hands in mock surrender. The fingers that aren't missing twiddle innocently. What are you getting at? Midoriya keeps his razor-sharp focus on the slimy penguin in front of him. He's not fooled by the act, and he's even more on edge by the undertone of confidence from the corrupted businessman. The money you gave me is the Yakuza's. Yeah, I don't need to go making enemies who might consider it still theirs, if you understand where this is going. Okuda begins to elaborate as he works his way towards his computer monitor. There, he's able to show conversions and money transfers through the screen. Seeing that as a form of karma, Midoriya shrugs without care. You took the payment. There's no refunds for dirty transactions. It's not like he's the one who agreed to their terms in the first place, even if Okuda doesn't know that himself. That's what money laundering is for, to get it clean. Okuda snaps indignantly now that he's reached his tipping point. The end of the rope for his patience has been reached, spit flying from his mouth as he squawks, the way I see it, you owe me now. I even hand-delivered your order for you. Now where's my tip? Midoriya turns away from the penguin that's furiously flapping his arms. I'm sure you get plenty of tips at the bar. You run a fine establishment. You'll be fine. He needs to shift the power dynamic back in his favor, and this is how he plans to do so. No need to be so stingy when you run such a fine business yourself. Okuda desperately tries to think of a way to blackmail the man prepared to walk out on him and regain control. Or are you planning to spend it all on that orphan girl's tuition? He lands on the reason he assumes Midoriya wants the thumb drive in the first place. Midoriya stops at the door, pausing there. I told you to not speak of her. His voice is a low growl, but it's loud enough for Okuda to hear it. Midoriya hadn't actually planned on leaving without the USB in the first place, but now he has more incentive to swindle the penguin. Well, that entirely depends on you. Okuda's smug smile returns now that he thinks he's regained control of the situation. He keeps utilizing what he views as Midoriya's weakness to try and renegotiate the conditions of their unspoken contract. You wouldn't want me to go telling her how naughty her new daddy is, would you? Midoriya reaches out with his hand, grabbing the latch on the door. He turns it, the lock clicking in place. He pulls his hood back over his head to conceal the expression that he's making. It isn't one that belongs to Izuku Midoriya. Even without his mask, it'll be evident to Penguin who it is he's actually conducting business with now. You're not going anywhere near her. Midoriya turns around to face Okuda, but his facial features are shrouded in the darkness that he's excreting through his aura. Sensing the extreme danger that he's in, Okuda nearly trips over his desk while backing away. Now wait just a bloody minute. He holds out a three-fingered hand in an attempt to hold Midoriya back. It's the same one that got broken the last time. It's now broken again. Okuda crows as loud as he can, a mixture of pain release and a call for help. Midoriya snatches away the USB that he came for before breaking into a sprint for the window. He knows before Killer Croc comes barreling through it that the front door wasn't an option. The reptilian Namu gives chase when the hooded thief leaps through the glass, both of them launching themselves into the wet world where predators play. Midoriya lands on a parked car, caving in its roof. He bounces off of it by his heels, moving with his continued momentum. When Aguchi lands on the same vehicle with his added weight, it's crushed entirely. The crocodilian beast roars before pursuing the runner. Midoriya avoids the crowded sidewalk and busy street, not wanting to put any of the pedestrians in danger when it comes to Croc's warpath for him. Instead, he darts for a dark alley. It twists and turns with various corners, the back exits of shady businesses on either wall's side. Graffiti screams profanity for him up to the point of reaching a dead end. While that would mean doom and damnation for anyone else cornered by Killer Croc, for a person who's trained to peak physical condition, he's able to meet the obstacle head-on. His sneakers scrape the brick walls as he bounds from one side to the next, carrying himself up the heights towards the roof ledges. Just as he's about to reach the top, his leg is grabbed by the massive monster below. Deku slams Midoriya into the ground with a single downward motion. The impact rattles Midoriya's bones and his back bounces against the pavement. Already, he's got all the wind knocked out of him, from exerting himself earlier and now this body abuse. He wheezes harshly to grab greedy intakes of air. The massive croc reels his fist back, about to end it all as quickly as it started. But Midoriya rolls to the side in the nick of time to avoid being crushed. The ground shatters and cracks instead of his bones. But he feels the quake from the earth reach him just the same. The apex predator roars, rain splattering in a mix of saliva and rage that he missed. Midoriya scrambles to get to his feet, narrowly avoiding a secondary swipe of the beast's fist barreling towards him again. He tumbles backwards from a gust of wind pressure, crashing into a pile of collected trash. Loaded bags spill out of a few garbage cans, not enough to hold how much waste there is. Midoriya reaches for his waist, forgetting that there isn't a handy utility belt there to save him. He wishes he had just stealthily taken the drive from Penguin as Batman, thinking he could have avoided this fight or been prepared for the inevitable that way. However, in the moment, he also thinks innovatively to fight without his gadgets. He grabs one of the trash cans, swinging it at Degu's head. It does nothing. The thin metal container folds against the thick hide. Killer Croc reacts violently, snapping at Midoriya with a vicious bite. The hoodie he's wearing gets caught, ripping as it's pulled in the opposite direction that Midoriya pulls. His green hair flaps wildly in the rain as he dodges to evade the monstrous opponent he's fighting. Deku lashes out, pointed fingertips nearly shredding more than Midoriya's jacket. He falls back, a flat palm stopping his descent before it becomes a full collapse. Then, Midoriya twists his body backwards and uses that same hand as a springboard to flip away from a secondary strike. It's not the rematch that he was hoping for, but Midoriya strikes a defensive stance like the last time he faced Killer Croc. It's one he's sure Deku will recognize, and will help to finally be able to place his scent, but he's left no choice. The massive monster towers over him, rain pouring off of his scales. Then it charges, jaw unhinged and ready to devour. Midoriya bends down, using Croc's size and strength against him. The maneuver he uses flips the opponent using their own power. Croc collides with a wall, bricks breaking and dust updrafting. Midoriya waves the smoke away from his eyes and holds his breath as he jumps back, not wanting to inhale any of it. With his vision obscured, he isn't able to see the hand that reaches for him until it's too late. It's the size of his chest, grabbing his entire body. Midoriya shouts as he feels an extreme pressure pushing his ribcage in. He was barely able to withstand a hit with his body armor on the last time. He knows he won't survive without it this time. Midoriya brings a knee up into Killer Croc's chin, not wanting to be another one of his victims. Then, he lands an elbow by swinging it downward atop Croc's head. The benefit of being so up close and personal with Degu's face is that he's able to get a few good licks in. He aims for the nose first, then the mouth, knocking a few fangs loose. When all else fails, Midoriya goes for the eyes. He jams his thumbs into them, pressing hard. Deku bellows with affliction, tossing Midoriya across the alley in favor for his hand to rub at his aching eyes. Midoriya grunts a few times as he tumbles across the floor. The upside, though, is that he got free of Croc's grip. Not wanting to waste the very short time he has before the beast recovers, Midoriya forces himself to get back up. In between the two of them, there's a manhole cover. There's been stories about alligators in the sewers, but he doubts Deku would be able to fit in order to follow him. Midoriya takes the chance. He tosses the heavy lid off, in the direction of Deku. Croc bats it aside, vision recovering already. Deku reaches for him again, but he's already jumping into the open hole. Above him, Killer Croc roars with the thunder. Below the city drenched in rain is the flushing of its shit and piss within a storm drain. A drowning bat without its wings can't escape the rush of dirtied water. It's one of those nights, the kind that makes it difficult to fall asleep. Shadows creep like creatures that could also be hiding under the bed or in the closet. Floorboards creak as though they're being stepped on. Noises occupying what should be an empty ambience. The paranoia of a boogerman keeps Melissa Shield wide awake. She tosses and she turns in bed, not daring to close her eyes now that they've adjusted to the dark enough for her to see. Well, as much as she can see without her glasses on. When Shield hears a thump louder than the other odd noises that her house makes, she reaches for those glasses to better enhance her vision. If she can't go asleep now, then she definitely won't be able to close her eyes unless self-assured that the sound doesn't belong to an actual person or monster. She throws her bed sheets off and climbs out of bed to investigate. Shield is as quiet as a mouse herself, taking light steps outside her bedroom. There, silhouetted by the moonlight gleaming through a window, stands a figure shaped like a person. Shield's heart skips a beat, her mouth opening to scream in alarm. Nobody ever actually expects to find someone or something as the source of nightly commotion. Yet this time, she's found the Nightwalker responsible for it all. Or so she thinks, until the figure steps deeper into the room so the moonlight reveals their features. Hi, Izuku. Midoriya awkwardly waves with a wince when he sees her reaction. Though startled doesn't even begin to describe the way S.H.I.E.L.D. is feeling, she does take notice of his disheveled appearance, his torn articles of clothing damp and clinging to him like his hair. He looks like a drowned rat. You look like shit. She tries not to sound too concerned but urgently ushers him to her couch. Either way, sit down. Are you alright? Still rather bashful, Midoriya rubs the back of his neck and takes a seat. Yeah, we really gotta stop meeting like this. His attempt at smoothing out the situation in the form of a joke is just as inelegant as his posture. But S.H.I.E.L.D. plays along anyways. What kind of neighborhoods are you going to for this to happen twice? Hoping that it's some sort of comfort zone that'll allow him to cope with explaining his injuries or presence. It's a long story. Her hope falls short of itself when he pushes her away. I don't need you to patch me up this time. She gives him a once-over and fails to keep the skepticism out of her voice. I'd beg to differ. Then the smell hits her. She shakes her head to try and clear her sinuses. Are you here for a shower? You smell like shit too. Ignoring the remark, Midoriya digs into his pocket. He then pulls out a USB to present. I'm here for this. A thumb drive. S.H.I.E.L.D. tilts her head curiously before taking the small device from him to see up close. Midoriya nods while requesting, can you take a look at what's on it for me? Still processing the random suddenness of his arrival in her home and what he's asking of her in his current state. All S.H.I.E.L.D. can manage is, sure. She stands up to go and grab her laptop while asking, this couldn't wait until morning. You had to break into my house. Midoriya sinks into her couch as though the questions are heavy loaded and they're weighing him down. It couldn't wait. His voice takes a tone that tells her he's serious, but she still can't imagine a justification for his theatrical dramatics. And why me? She tries digging a little deeper for a better explanation while digging for her computer still. Midoriya closes his eyes as he takes the moment he needs to answer that question. He himself doesn't know whether it's due to rationalization or his emotions being compromised. He could say because her house was the closest again, or that he wanted an excuse to see her. He just can't explain his reasons for avoiding Kurogiri and his own home. So he settles on, because you're the only one who I can trust right now. S.H.I.E.L.D. falters when she hears that. Her face starts to heat up, but she quickly stifles the feeling by swallowing it down. Okay then. She sets her laptop up and turns it on while prying for more. If you trust me so much, then why not tell me how you really got so battered up? Midoriya exhales through his nose, just short of being a mild form of amusement. When he gives his response, S.H.I.E.L.D. is pretty sure that he does find it all humorous in some way. Same reason I smell like I wrestled an alligator in the sewers. Because I did. Fine. Keep her secrets. She rolls her eyes while plugging the USB he gave her into her laptop's side socket. In a matter of seconds, she's given a prompt. It looks like this thumb drive has its fair share of secrets too. It's encrypted. What's the password? S.H.I.E.L.D. sighs as she glances over her shoulder with the expectation of an actual answer to this question at the very least. But Midoriya sits up, looking back at her. Her expression matches his when he asks, it's lock protected? Wait, is this not yours? It's her turn to look and sound confused. If this entire ordeal weren't already strange enough, he's just gone and made it weirder. He waves off the question in favor of asking his own. Are you able to get in or not? I'm not sure. S.H.I.E.L.D. frowns as she returns her attention to the prompt on her screen. When she clicks and reads all that it's giving her, she's even more baffled. There's a riddle for the password hint. Midoriya moves from her couch to looking over her shoulder so he can read it for himself. What perspective can still be seen the same when in reverse or looked at from others? S.H.I.E.L.D. ever so slightly tilts her head as she mulls the riddle over and guesses, at an angle. No, it's more complicated than that. But Midoriya shoots the attempt at an answer down and tries working around the riddle. Can't you just bypass this? S.H.I.E.L.D. shakes her head and crosses her arms, admitting momentary defeat, not without a supercomputer and a lot more time. Midoriya hums as he weighs his options. He does have a supercomputer, but potentially not a whole lot of time. He also wants to avoid running into Kurogiri for as long as he can prolong. He starts to ponder the riddle. He thinks that if the game master is Intelli, she must know about his identity. Perhaps, even if the enigma of an enemy isn't her, they may still know he and Batman are one and the same. Which means someone of their stature would tauntingly tease him. Thinking from the perspective of a bat, Midoriya twists the laptop so that it faces upside down. Hey, what are you? He ignores S.H.I.E.L.D.'s protests as he looks for any chance that his hunch is correct. S.H.I.E.L.D. stops short, seeing the same clue that he finds. The code that had been running along the surface was flipped using letters instead of ones and zeros. However, that would only be decipherable from this path. Midoriya returns the laptop to its ordinary position and types into the answer key, upside down. However, when he hits the enter button, access is still denied. S.H.I.E.L.D.'s face scrunches in disappointment as she says, looks like that wasn't it. Midoriya's eyes return to the letters that flutter along the screen. He watches them carefully, noting that they're the same ones and not the entirety of the American alphabet. Fortunately for him, he knows the English language well enough to put 2 and 2 together. He types in Umapapiston and hits the enter button a second time. The password gets accepted. When he sees S.H.I.E.L.D. eyeing him inquisitively, he explains to her how he figured out the solution to the puzzle. You can spell the words upside down and in reverse with other letters of the alphabet. Different perspectives, but still the same. The elaboration has S.H.I.E.L.D. scoffing in disbelief. Quite the password, she huffs to herself. The small pout is over not solving it herself, Midoriya imagines. Let's see what was so important to keep hidden. But she does do the liberty of handling everything else. Her fingers fly across the keyboard and she opens a command board with all sorts of orders written into it. That's weird. She's more perturbed by that than the riddle. What is it? Midoriya glances between the code and her as he tries to see what she sees. This algorithm looks familiar. It's not the one UA itself used. It's more like a breaker than a secured network, but still belongs to that same one. Her explanation isn't as easy for him to comprehend as his was to hers earlier though. A virus. He takes a guess at what she could mean. But guesses wrong, not exactly. S.H.I.E.L.D. opens a separate window to use her internet browser. This is when the dark web comes in handy. Midoriya raises a brow at that, but refrains from making any sort of comment. Then S.H.I.E.L.D. says something that has him craning to look at the screen again. Oh my, this is the same network that was used to hack into UA long ago, when Gentle Criminal and Librava interrupted an annual festival. His eyes widen as he reads the results that she's gotten from her deep search. What would somebody want with this? S.H.I.E.L.D. looks back at him in the hopes that he'll have an answer that isn't foreboding. But the least foreboding of reasons Midoriya can muster is, unless it belonged to them originally. And that actually makes sense to him when he considers the possibility. Minami Eba, Librava, had been the partner of Gentle Criminal. The two were known for their shameless advertisements of the Imperial Tea brand while committing illegal activities on the internet. The teacup he had found at one of the Riddler's hideaways coupled with the Riddler's high-pitched voice leaning towards feminine or younger makes sense with the reuse of her own code. Intelli is no longer his only suspect. Watching Midoriya mutter to himself as he overthinks the need for what's on the USB leaves S.H.I.E.L.D. wondering more than ever. What have you gotten yourself involved in? Her question snaps him out of his musings. Realizing the potential danger she could get into if she learns more, he shuts her down. Nothing you need to be involved in. Midoriya unplugs the flash drive and starts to head for the window that he snuck in through. Sorry that I came here. I didn't know what was on the device. S.H.I.E.L.D. stands up to follow and stop him. No, you but pauses when her doorbell rings. She and Midoriya freeze like deer in headlights, turning their attention to the door. Midoriya's posture straightens and S.H.I.E.L.D. realizes just how much he must have slouched for her not to notice his muscles or height until now. Expecting somebody. Even his voice has a much more hardened and focused tone. Nervously, S.H.I.E.L.D. fidgets with her glasses and admits, not this soon. Meaning, Midoriya shoots her a look. I kinda texted Hatsum a little while after you got here. She shrugs and turns away from him to hide her shame. Why? He's too confused to notice her heading for the door until it's too late. Wait. Fortunately, it does happen to just be Hatsum and not some psycho with a gun or Killer Croc having followed Midoriya's scent. Hey, Muscles. The inventor extraordinaire greets her boss while raising up a big metallic briefcase. I brought your new suit. At the mention of a suit, Midoriya blinks questionably. She told me what your secret project was for her and... Yeah, I know. S.H.I.E.L.D. avoids eye contact as she tries to explain herself. She does have the courtesy of letting Hatsum in and closing the door so none of her neighbors overhear though. Midoriya brings a hand to his forehead, just short of a facepalm. You both knew. He realizes that his secret is out. You didn't think I knew what all those babies were for. Hatsum's dreadlocks sway when she tilts her head incredulously. Midoriya takes the briefcase from her to open it and see if he's being misled. When he finds a chest plate with a bat printed on the front, he fully accepts that this is actually happening. I didn't think you cared. He sighs heavily now that he has to deal with the two knowing about his alter ego. What kind of irresponsible mother would I be if that were the case? And Hatsum's comments like that aren't helping. Oh god, he really does allow himself to facepalm this time. His hand remains on his face when S.H.I.E.L.D. chimes back in. So, how about telling me that long story now, Batman? The shadow of a bat illuminated in the sky overlooks Japan the same as the rooftop from which the symbol radiates. How one light can shine brighter than an entire cityscape is a riddle more puzzling than the ones that came from an actual Riddler. And yet, it's a question that goes unanswered for the sake of accepting what Batman merely is. A man, a vigilante, a legend, a detective, a hero. Commissioner Tsukachi and Lemillion stand by the modified floodlight they keep stationed on the police precinct, unsuspecting of the arrival of who they intend to contact with it. A living shadow stands behind the commissioner and pro-hero. You can turn it off now. Midoriya emerges from the darkness as Batman only after he's announced his presence. Tsukachi jumps in place. Jesus, nearly gave me a heart attack. Placing a hand over his chest, Not even I can be that stealthy. Lemillion brushes off his initial shock with awe and praise of the vigilante's abilities. He also notices the upgrade in fashion. Whoa, new suit, looking good, flashing a thumbs up of approval. Batman ignores both of their remarks, getting straight to business by asking, why the signal? Remembering the vigilante isn't one for small talk, Sukachi is quick with his last comment. Didn't know if you were alive according to Mindjack and your leave of absence. Then provides a rough recap from his end. Quite a lot happened lately. We had a lead on Penguin that we were hoping could finally help us nail him to a cross, but it just so happened to fall flat, unless we arrest Izuku Midoriya too. Batman furrows his brows behind his mask at that. He had thought his alter ego had already been cleared, so he says, Midoriya is innocent. Sukachi nods along in agreement. I know, I saw to figuring that out for myself. But soon after realizes what the vigilante said and asks, wait a minute, how do you know that? Batman refrains from cursing under his breath. After the whole fiasco with his arrest, the Iceberg Lounge, and his identity being outed to two chaotic women, not mentioning the scandal with Kurogiri and his parents, he's too tired to carry on into the night. It's a struggle to come up with an excuse, his mind too strained. He supplies me, so lands on one that he immediately regrets. Hence the new suit. Lemillion nods as he eyes the upgraded outfit a second time. That explains the gadgets. Sukachi also nods in understanding as he connects a few dots. It's him who Midoriya worries about the most, considering the commissioner was a detective before his promotion and has the qualified mind to make a deduction of identity. Is he working on Batman Inc. now? Lemillion's quip earns a glare from the already aggravated vigilante. Tagada holds up his hands in mock surrender, joking, a bead of sweat rolling down his forehead as he tries to apologize. Returning to the task at hand, Batman digs into his utility belt to hand over the thumb drive he had acquired from the Iceberg Lounge. I have new dirt on Penguin that may be able to help you make an arrest. He has no problem forfeiting the intel now that he no longer has any use for it. Does it have to do with our mysterious Riddler? Sukachi takes the USB from Batman's gloved hand to have a closer look. While the aged law enforcer is inspecting the small plug-in, for better or worse, it does. Batman confirms the commissioner's question. Sukachi grumbles, figured, while shoving the device into his coat pocket. It'll take time to get a warrant. I suggest also assembling a team of some sort. Penguin has a peculiar bodyguard. Batman recalls his encounter with Killer Croc due to the phantom pains that run throughout his body in that moment. Lemillion laughs like the vigilante just told a joke. I doubt there'll be any match against me. His bicep bulges when he flexes for emphasis. Perhaps, but don't get too arrogant. Batman doesn't doubt All Might's successor's power output but warns him of being too cocky. Being overconfident never ends well. So this is all we have on our enigma, huh? Sukachi switches the bat signal off as he winds down the conversation. Mindjack's trail went cold too. He wanted me to thank you for saving him, by the way. Recalling the underground hero and the danger he had been in when getting involved, Batman replies, tell him to stop following it then. Then he adds, I've got another potential lead anyways. You do. Tagada's cape whirls the same way Sukachi's overcoat does when they each pivot to face the vigilante. Potentially. Batman emphasizes his word usage before committing to the so-called lead. I need to ask you for a favor. Best me, asks the man behind a clear blast barrier. Midoriya stares at him through the thick glass, staying within the concealment of shadows. The man that he sees is caught between who he was and who he is now. Pointed hair is a faded green, exposing blonde roots now that the dye is diminishing. The lime hue matches the bulb that glows above, illuminating bleached skin. Crimson eyes search for Midoriya's emerald, finding them when the garbed vigilante steps forward. The inmate grins as he looks the caped crusader up and down. Is that a new suit? Don't tell me you've gone and gotten all dressed up for little Almi. He giggles to himself while twisting back and forth to show off his own appearance. They don't really let me wear much else than this straitjacket here. I think the color clashes with my eyes. Wouldn't you agree? Ever since their battle at the hospital, Midoriya had done his best to forget about the tragedy that transpired to create such a malformed version of his former friend. He'd put all of his focus into his nightly endeavors to avoid thinking about it. But now there's no ignoring what's right in front of him. He can't bring himself to look directly into the fallen hero's eyes. Not anymore. Not when there's a bullet hole in between them that destroyed his mind. Why are you staring at me like that? Do I have something on my face? In my teeth? The convalescent cranes forward as he tries to goad a response out of the brooding vigilante. When he doesn't receive anything, he finally snaps and shouts, you came to see me, remember. You have a mouth, so fucking speak. The angry outburst is what manages to get through to Midoriya. The furious expression on his former friend's face is much more recognizable than an eerie smile. Batman swallows down his emotions, reining them in with a hoarse whisper, Kakin. Katsuki Bakugo, or what's left of him, laughs at that, as persistent as ever with that shit nickname. I never could tell if you were playing a joke on me like I was when calling you Deku. He returns to a nonchalant form of manner by leaning back into his chair. Midoriya sits across from him, occupying his own chair. You're sounding more like yourself again. They've been giving you proper treatment. He continues to search for any remains of his friend through the stained glass, but all he gets in return is another shrill laugh. There's no fixing my brain. Do I really need to get the word damage tattooed on my head for you to understand that? Midoriya looks away, staring down at the floor. His gloved hands curl into fists, tightening and trembling at his sides. I don't believe there's no hope. There's always hope. He has a difficult time believing his own words, but his voice stays steady somehow, though he's pretty sure Kaken sees right through it anyways. Don't tell me you're a Lemillion supporter. Bleh. If I could throw up without being quarantined, I would. The Khan's remark gets the vigilante to look up at him again. An unspoken question of how an inmate would come by any outside information. Heroes or not, has the detained grinning. He shrugs as though it's no big deal. Word gets around. What do you know? Batman asks with a pointed glare. You'll have to be a bit more specific, lamb chop. Bakugo's toothy smile stretches a bit further as he taunts the vigilante some more, before things can escalate. However, he sighs and slouches back into his chair. This is all nice and well, but why don't you just ask me about what you came here for already? He suddenly shifts to something a little more serious. Grateful for the change in pace, Batman takes the opportunity. Himiko Toga, what do you know about her escape? He goes for a more direct approach. Bakugo raises a brow. Talking gals, are we? I didn't think she was your type. I'm serious. But Batman remains unamused and undeterred. Now fully realizing the reason for the arranged meeting between himself and the vigilante, Bakugo relents. Not without a roll of his eyes first though. She didn't break out by herself if that's what you're asking. He recalls the night of her escape and the conversation in her cell that he had overheard. Looking for a lucky break in his investigation, Batman asks, did you see who aided her? But instead receives a resounding, nope, with Bakugo playfully popping the P at the end. The inmate's red eyes glimmer under the limelight as he asks his own question. Are they giving you trouble? Batman ignores the question, opting for another one of his own. You went to UA. What do you remember about the Culture Festival attack? He just hopes that Bakugo's brain damage hasn't destroyed those memories too much. Boy, does that take me back. Bakugo sighs almost rather fondly as he stares upwards in a faint flashback state. When he looks dead ahead again, he bursts the imaginary bubble with a harsh tone. I remember not participating. I didn't give two shits. You weren't there when La Brava and Gentle Criminal attacked. Batman frowns since he steered himself into another dead end. He doesn't know whether information is being withheld or if he's simply being led on as some sort of gag. But it's beginning to become evident that it's either of the two. You think those two nobodies are who broke Toga out? Bakugo laughs at the implication like he's just been told a hilarious joke. When he's finished with his giggle fit, Kaken shakes his head in disbelief. I thought you were smarter than that, nerd. Share legs scrape against the floor when Batman abruptly stands up. He turns, his cape twisting with him, before heading for the exit. This is getting me nowhere. He grumbles more to himself than to the remnant of his friend. Leaving already. It isn't like you to storm off when upset. Kaken calls after the vigilante. They must really be getting under your skin. Giving you a real challenge, are they? Midoriya pauses at the exit, just short of turning the door's handle and leaving. He glances over his shoulder at his former friend. You're the only one getting on my nerves. If you're not going to be the least bit helpful, there's no reason for me to waste my time here anymore. Bakugo's unnerving smile reminds the vigilante of Toga's bloodthirsty grin. I was just making sure. The inmate takes the Caped Crusader's words as some sick form of validation. He rolls his head, cracking his neck. Still, you must have been desperate to come see me. And never once does the smile leave his face. Then again, maybe you were just looking for an excuse all this time. Batman returns his gaze to the exit as he responds. I doubt we'll see each other again if you don't plan on leaving here. And then turns the latch on the door to leave. As he walks out, he says with finality, goodbye, Kaken. But it's only after the door closes behind Midoriya that Bakugo replies back. Oh, I plan on leaving here. Eventually. We'll see each other again real soon, Deku. He eagerly awaits his reunion with his childhood friend and rival. Batman's knees buckle when his feet collide with the next rooftop. He hadn't been keeping count of how many he's left onto, but he'd have lost the number by now had he been. All night, the Caped Crusader has been traversing the top of buildings. After the trail went cold on Riddler with his visit to Katsuki Bakugo, he took to patrolling the city. It's been an exhausting output and immense exertion to travel on foot, that he's finally at his limit. His legs give out and he tumbles across the roof he's landed on. His body armor protects him from collecting any more bruises or scrapes. But the rough ride leaves him sprawled out and breathing heavily. The sky has a shade of blue in it as night turns to morning. He stares up at it, allowing himself to bask in the rising sunlight. The way the radiating beams hit the glass windows of the skyscrapers makes for a gorgeous view. He climbs to his feet, stepping up to the ledge of the roof that he's on to overlook the city. Cars are starting to drive their early bird commute to work. Joggers and pet owners are heading out for their morning walks. He recedes from the ledge so that he can't be seen. As much as he hates to admit it, he'll have to head back home now. He can't stay out as Batman anymore. He does suppose he can stay down in the cave, but he has no doubt that Kurogiri will attempt to pay him a visit. The excuse will be to bring him a meal, tea, or coffee. Yet the true meaning of those bothersome visits will be to reconcile. He knows that it's unavoidable. The talk is inevitable, but he's just not ready for it yet. Luckily for him, he has another conversation to get through first. I thought I'd find you brooding somewhere if I looked for you long enough. A feminine voice reaches his ears, but it takes him pivoting to find the source with his eyes. Shirotoko. Batman recognizes the woman immediately despite the goggles covering her face. She's still wearing the same skin-tight leather outfit that she did when they first met. Even so, the vigilante is on guard, not used to being snuck up on. The former pro-heroine turned vigilante raises her goggles up so that they rest on her forehead instead of covering her eyes, allowing the woman a better look at her fellow vigilante. She takes in his appearance, acknowledging the upgraded getup, but noting that the bat insignia hasn't changed in the slightest. You look good. Her voice is a soft purr that eases the earlier tension. So do you. Midoriya unwillingly finds himself relaxing in her presence. He takes in her appearance, one that he hasn't seen in a long time. Her yellow eyes match the hue of the sun behind her. Batman quickly dissipates those thoughts and remembers to ask, "What are you doing here?" "Kurogiri called me." Shirotoko rests a hand on her hip as she relays the reason for her return. And that's all Batman needs to hear in order to walk away. He shakes his head as he goes for the next ledge for a departure from the rooftop they're on. Damn it. Izuku, wait. But Shirotoko grabs him by the crook of an elbow to prevent him from storming off. When Batman looks over his shoulder at her to make her release him, he realizes her expression is as gentle as her grip. She lets go of him anyways. Don't do this. Don't be you and shut me out. Letting him know she means no harm. Batman holds his stare for a while longer, internally wrestling with his options to go or stay. Eventually, Midoriya decides to ask, "What did he tell you?" Shirotoko's look of concern remains as she answers, "Nothing. Just that something's wrong. That you were ready to give up your life for your crusade again." Batman shakes his head in disbelief before fully turning to face her. He has a tough time reining in his frustration as he counters, "There's nothing wrong with that. That never changed. I gave up my life a long time ago so that I could become what I have to be." But Shirotoko shuts him down by reminding him, "That's not what we agreed on when I left." She stares into his eyes while she asks, "What about Uri?" Midoriya is unable to hold the gaze, breaking away and closing his eyes. "She's going to UA. She'll have friends." He excuses himself from that duty and his responsibility to her with as much resolve as he can muster. But Shirotoko can see that the resolve is very little. He can't bear to look her in the eye and he doesn't believe his own words. "Izuku, look at me," she demands. When he doesn't, she says it again more softly, "Take off your mask and look at me." Slowly, Midoriya raises his hands behind his head to undo his cowl. He keeps his eyes closed as he removes the mask. He keeps his head lowered. He doesn't hide the shame. Only when Shirotoko places one of her hands against his cheek does he open his eyes. He leans his face into her tender touch as she says, "You know better than anyone that friends won't be enough. She needs a parent." Because she's right. But he pulls away soon after, remembering the reason he was ready to give up his lifestyle as Izuku Midoriya in the first place. "Kurogiri was that to me. And now, I don't want to do the same to her. What if I let her down?" He worries about the secrets and lies he has to keep sometimes as Batman, and how they may affect the people in his life the way his caretaker's lies and secrets did. That's up to you to change. And whatever Kurogiri did wrong, he's clearly trying to make up for it too. But Shirotoko is ready to assure him. Midoriya has to hold himself back from sighing in defeat. All it took was one little talk and he caved so easily. He also has to admit to her though, "You're right." Shirotoko smiles sweetly as she brushes against his chest. Small, she nestles against him. "I always am." Her teasingly flirtatious tone makes smiling contagious, a small smile gracing his lips. He wraps his arms around her and holds her. He realizes in that moment what he allowed to get away when she left, and he has to be grateful to be able to hug her. "I'm glad that you're back. I'm sure Uri will be too." Shirotoko hums in equal elation before looking up at him to ask, "Can I come with you to see her?" "Of course, she'd love that." Midoriya nods and his smile stretches slightly bigger. Suddenly, the dawn of a new day has a much more vibrant meaning to the man. Removing his mask as Batman has allowed Izuku Midoriya to step back into the light. And he isn't alone. Returning to the manor he calls his home, he has a family waiting for him there. He's greeted at the entrance by a cheerful barking. The shepherd and Dane mix bounds into him. asking to be scratched behind the ears by nudging its snout into his hands. Hello to you too, Ace. Midoriya chuckles as he gives the mutt what it wants. When Ace fixes his sights on Shirotoko, she tries to avoid the incoming slobber attack. Don't even think about it, dog. But fails miserably when he breaks past her defense and licks her face mercilessly. Erg. Okay, fine. Yuri joins the fray next. Izuku, running into Midoriya for a hug. Eri, good morning. He returns the hug before crouching down more to her level. Did you sleep well? MMHM. She nods. Then she notices the greenette standing nearby. Tomoko. Hey there. I missed you too. Shirotoko laughs when Eri barrels into her harder than the dog did. Are you back for good now? Eri asks from within Shirotoko's hold. The question catches Shirotoko by surprise. Well, she finds herself looking at Midoriya for help, but he's giving her just as inquisitive an expression as Eri. Time will tell. She's grateful for Kirigiri when he arrives to come to her rescue. He places a hand on Eri's head to steer her away while reminding her, speaking of time, shouldn't you be getting ready for class, young lady? Eri groans in complaint. Ugh, fine. But obeys and goes to grab her school supplies anyways. When she turns, Midoriya notices a fresh wound under an elbow. He stops her before she can run off. Whoa, wait. He recalls the bandages she was wrapped in when he found her and immediately worries about the worst-case scenario. How did this happen? Battle training. It's just a scratch. But Eri waves it off as nothing to be concerned with. She even goes as far to proudly show it off and announce, now we'll match. I don't know how I feel about that. Midoriya feels his face heat up in embarrassment. On one hand, he doesn't want her to be gaining scars for the sake of looking like him. But on the other hand, he can't help but feel a bit of pride for some reason. He's almost ashamed of himself for being a bad influence. Almost. I think it's kinda cute. Shirotoko leans against his shoulder in order to tease him over it. Ace barks as though communicating with her. Midoriya worries that they actually can speak with one another and that she's more than a Catwoman when she says, see. The dog agrees. Midoriya lets out a breath that he didn't realize he had been holding. So this is what it's like to have a kid. Will I ever stop worrying about her? He stands back up as he watches Eri get ready for school. Kirigiri joins him at his other side, also watching the girl he adopted enthusiastically prepare for the day ahead. Not for a single second. I don't think any parent does. Even I occasionally still poke my head into your room when you're sleeping to check if you're still breathing. He speaks with a fondness that really resonates with Midoriya. Despite his guardian's history and his family's ties to crime, he can't help but be touched at his heart. He realizes that Kirigiri truly does care for him. Not just as a butler, but as a parent. For him to have ever doubted Kirigiri, he feels foolish. And now, Kirigiri aids him in his crusade. Whether that be a form of retribution or for his sake, Midoriya accepts the penance. He rests a hand on Kirigiri's shoulder and gives it a firm squeeze as he says, that does sound like something a father would do. Red and blue lights illuminate the night. Police cruisers parked outside of the Iceberg lounge. The radiant ice sculpture bounces the colored hues back, the warm and cold spectrum spinning like a giant disco ball. Plenty of heroes, underground and pro, are ready to attend the party. Mindjack and Lemillion join Commissioner Tsukachi on the front lines, backed by a warrant and several other officers. Others are in attendance as well. Batman and feminine vigilante out of view, ready to enter the club through the back entry. Tonight is the night that they bring down a major villain informant and mobster, the Penguin. Well aware of the task force prepared to end his whole operation, Penguin's first move is to send out his enforcer in an attempt to stall them. Killer Croc, the Namu blended with Trigger Science Project, comes barreling through the front entry's set of double doors. The reptilian behemoth lets loose a guttural roar, fangs bared. Bullets bounce off the hulkish lizard's scales when the cops fire off rounds, forcing one of the heroes to act. Lemillion darts forwards, a small percentage of power giving him the boost needed to close the distance between himself and Killer Croc in record time. It's that same amount of output that finishes the fight before it can even begin. A single punch all it takes to knock down the quirk-enhanced Shuichi Iguchi. The Namu groans as it gets sprawled out. All Might's successor smiles in triumph before rallying the other heroes and law enforcement. Lemillion ushers the group forward, leading the charge into the nightclub. Penguin's establishment is full of low-tier goons who try fighting back. But the weak forces are quickly overpowered just like their trump card was. Soga Kijisaki ducks under Mindjack's capture scarf, having had combat experience against the weapon during the days of Eraserhead's career. But he too eventually goes down when Mindjack uses his quirk to make Kijisaki stop fighting. However, his employees are a sacrifice that Penguin is willing to make, using them as a distraction. Kajero Okuda tries sneaking out the back exit to escape. The coward makes a break for it through the alley, but he doesn't get very far. A bat-shaped shuriken spins through the air and pierces the place between his thigh and calf. Okuda squawks in pain as he trips and falls, clutching his injured leg. Penguin screams even louder when he sees Batman drop down to retrieve the batarang. "You bloody bastard." Okuda seethes through what teeth still remain in his mouth. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'm the man who hired assassins to kill you, and nothing is stopping me from doing it again." He tries crawling backwards with his one good leg while threatening the slow-approaching vigilante in hopes that one of the two strategies will save him. But all hope is truly lost for the criminal when Batman unveils a recording device from behind his cape. "Shall I take that as more of a confession to your crimes?" The vigilante can't help but smirk at the gawking expression that his outwitted opponent is making. Okuda hangs his head in solemn defeat. All the fight he had left leaving his system as the last of his spirit is drained. "I want my damn lawyer." His only hope is that he'll be able to still afford a good legal representative once his assets are cut off from him. Batman pockets his recording device before going for a pair of handcuffs. Once he brandishes them from his utility belt, he crouches down to arrest the Penguin. He figures now is as good a time as any to deliver some type of final heroic line. "Your reign of power is finished, Okuda." But he either jinxed the arrest or spoke too soon, because he's forced to dodge a knife before he can put the cuffs on Penguin. The blade slices through the air instead of his chest. At the very least, it passes by and stabs the alley wall instead, embedding itself in the brick. Batman spins around to face who threw it. He's expecting a mercenary or another hired help working for Okuda. What he finds instead is Himiko Toga. He had thought the crazed blonde far surpassed the need for a weapon, having evolved, but old habits die hard supposedly. "Hiya Batsy, I like the new suit. It makes you look hot." She flirtatiously taunts him from afar by fluttering her eyelashes and flicking up her short skirt. Same as ever, she wears something of a cross between a sailor's uniform and a schoolgirl's outfit. Suddenly, Shirotoko drops down and joins Midoriya at his side. She unties the whip that's wrapped around her waist like a belt and snaps it. "Back off, bitch. He's mine." The feminine vigilante gets into a fighting stance in order to defend her partner. Toga feigns a pout. "Awa, come on." Her indigent whine loses its facade rather quickly when she begins to melt though. Pretty soon, she's morphed into a flowing liquid with no distinguishable shape or face. The living clay gurgles as it asks, "Can't you share?" Shirotoko scrunches up her face in disgust at the leering slime, winding up her whip to lash out and keep it at bay. The strike causes the clay to splatter as the feline vigilante retorts, "Not when you look like that, I can't." But Toga quickly recovers, the moving mud rushing head-on like a massive fist. The crazed clay shouts at Shirotoko, "Rude." But the vigilante performs a backwards flip to avoid the attack before it can manage to connect. "So, what's the plan to take her down?" Shirotoko lands beside Batman in a low crouch where she takes a brief moment to glance up at him from her poised position. The two vigilantes split up to dodge another attack from Toga before reconjoining on a fire escape. Batman keeps his voice low as he answers Shirotoko, "She likes to talk. We'll use that against her." "And then what?" The heroine shoots another look at her partner, having expected more. Batman ducks under a flying clay axe before responding, "Improvise," and gliding down from the fire escape. Toga trails behind the caped crusader as he sprints for a dumpster. When Batman leaps over the metal container, he slides across the top to reach the other side, and then attaches two silver circles. The shiny devices activate and launch the dumpster-like ignition to a rocket. Toga's malleable form takes the hit easily, resulting in no lasting damage, but the maneuver does slow her down long enough for Batman to get out of her range, which also gives Shirotoko the time she needs to drop down from her perch and give a distraction of her own. She calls out to gain Toga's attention, "Hey, ugly." Toga twists her torso around akin to an exorcist, tentacles sprouting to reach out for her opponent. The additional appendages slam into the ground and snake after Shirotoko as she spins and somersaults to strafe the limbs, name-calling. "Is that the best you can do, cat lady?" Batman throws a few of his batarangs in an attempt to help, but the uniquely shaped shurikens just harmlessly sink into Toga's clay body. He then does the next best thing and tries to verbally draw her focus away from Shirotoko. "What are you doing here, Toga?" Toga raises a limb, spikes jutting out from the top of its spherical shape. Batman jumps back and dodges the attack as she answers, "Because you are, Batboy." The vigilante pauses to question her further, "You're targeting me." But Toga leaves no time for breathing room, maniacally laughing as her clay form spirals like a liquid tornado and launches pointed fragments from the vortex. Something like that. Both Batman and Shirotoko are forced to take cover to avoid being turned into pin cushions. The spires stab into several sections of the alley, but the dynamic duo manage to get behind objects where they're able to remain unscathed. "If you just wanted to get his attention, you should have tried wearing spandex or leather like me." Shirotoko taunts Toga from her corner cover to keep the dialogue-driven diversion going. But all that accomplishes is another heavy-hitting attack directed towards her. Toga forms a long tail that slings around and destroys a brick wall. The debris forces Shirotoko to run from her hiding spot and straight into a secondary strike. "I don't need your dating advice, kitty litter." The feline vigilante bounces twice across the alley before spreading like a starfish that's been washed ashore. Kitty litter. I've got to hand it to her. That was a good one. She groans in pain and breathes heavily from exhaustion as she takes a second to recuperate, taking Toga's focus off of his fallen comrade. Batman throws a handful of exploding capsules that detonate on impact. The clay burns at the corners of connectivity while trying to retain its shape. Hey, that coulda hurt me. But Batman is too busy checking on Shiratoko's well-being to notice. Are you okay? Then better. Shiratoko rotates her shoulder to work out the pain but nods nonetheless. Batman reaches into a compartment of his utility belt, take these, and places whatever he pulls out into his fellow vigilante's hand. Shiratoko uncurls her fingers to see what he placed in her palm, surprised to see tiny blue pellets. What are they? Pain pills, vitamins, liquid nitrogen capsules. Batman helps her stand while explaining the plan. The pods may be able to freeze her movements long enough for us to take her down. And she nods in agreement that the strategy can potentially work. Not a bad idea. Okay, let's do it. The two separate to cover opposite sides of Toga, making the femme fatale choose who to target. The crazed clay goes for Shiratoko first, assuming she's still weakened. But the feline vigilante is quick on her feet, springing from the floor to a ledge and then over Toga. Splitting up already. I thought you two were cute together. Toga gurgles from her melted mouth as she tries to keep track of the dynamic duo's separation. They reconvene almost in that same instance, each throwing their freezing pellets at the villainess. Chill out, girl. Nobody said anything about us breaking up. Shiratoko quips as the clay begins to harden from the quick frosting residue. Seriously, a nice pun. Batman looks at Shiratoko slightly disapprovingly, but the feline vigilante isn't too apologetic, shrugging off the criticism. I thought it was funny. She doesn't consider Batman the expert on humor anyways. I did so too, especially when others find the joke funny, such as the symbol of hope himself, Lemillion. The number one hero arrives in a flourish of his red cape, shattering the ice statue of Toga's clay form. He grins over having arrived in the nick of time, but stops when he notices Shiratoko. Wait, are you Batman's girlfriend? Before he can get an answer, Toga interrupts by reconnecting her separated fragments. What does that make me then? Is whore. She speaks with a venomous tone that gets everyone's guard back up. Batman steps forward, drawing a batarang. Save your questions for later. Toga is still active. Batman, look, but he gets stopped by Shiratoko grabbing his throwing arm. The vigilante listens, turning his attention upwards to see what it is that she's spotted, watching from a distant rooftop. There's a small silhouette. Batman notices the shadow is around the height and size of Aba as he had suspected. That must be our Riddler. Lemillion comes to the same conclusion of who the spectator may very well be when he notices the distant silhouette too. Go. Shiratoko urges Batman to pursue the other villain while she and Lemillion deal with Toga. We've got this. Take the rest of the nitrogen pods. But Batman takes a moment to spare the remainder of his icing pellet supply first, as well as pauses to fire a taser into Toga, the voltage disrupting the clay's composition. This may also help. He hands off the tool to Shiratoko once he's finished using it. Shiratoko accepts the equipment gratefully before giving him a gentle nudge to leave. Electricity and cold are her weakness. Got it. Now go already. The Caped Crusader listens, firing a grapple line and ascending into the night sky without another word. He does hear Lemillion speaking from behind him as he goes though. Boy, is Batman lucky to have a gal like you. Tell me about it. As well as Shiratoko's response. Batman shakes his head, focusing on the task at hand so that he doesn't become distracted. He doesn't take his eyes off the distant silhouette as it hops down from the roof it's on. Not wanting to lose sight of the shadow, he dives with his cape spread out in order to glide in. By the time he reaches the figure, they've made it to the streets. By the time he makes it to the streets, there's an open manhole cover. Not ready to give up the chase just yet, the vigilante follows the elusive enigma into the sewers. His boots slap the slush of the grates below before journeying deeper into the underground tunnels. Green sewage streams in the opposite direction, the current of the unfiltered water flow working against him. Fortunately, he knows he's heading in the right direction when he finds an equally green arrow spray painted on the tunnel wall. The directional cues lead him through the labyrinth until he reaches a boiler room lit by heat lamps. The room temperature is as hot as the steam coming from several vents and pipes. A catwalk leads him down to where a television monitor displays signature question marks in a contrasting green glow. Welcome, Batman. I'm so glad you were able to keep up. The squeaky voice he heard when confronting the riddle writer before echoes through the chamber. Batman spins as he searches for where the voice came from. Turn yourself in, Aba. I've read your file. You're not too far gone. You're not like Toga. A moment of silence passes where the vigilante thinks Aba actually will turn herself in. You think I'm Aba. That's an interesting theory. But he's instead still left with no name or face to the disembodied voice. Sorry to burst your bubble, but you'll have to guess again. Batman's eyes narrow as he searches for the elusive enigma. Then tell me, Who are you? First, answer my question. The voice comes from the television's internal speakers this time. What determines the gender of an alligator or a turtle? The TV's screen switches from its question-themed screensaver to a split-screen image of Killer Croc and Melissa Shield. Batman's eyes widen when he realizes Shield is locked in a furnace and Croc's feed is coming from his transport containment unit, assuming the two are being used as hostages somehow. Batman is left no choice but to answer the riddle he was given. He responds, the heat of the egg. Correct. It's so good to find someone who is also knowledgeable about animal trivia. The Riddler's disembodied voice gleefully giggles. Batman starts deconstructing the situation in his mind of how Shield and Aguchi were utilized. You gained access to Croc through Okuda and knew I would find the thumb drive with him, so you also installed a tracking device into the USB's contents. He figures the whole thing was just a way to trace the signal back to him. Also correct. I had already deduced your identity, Mr. Midoriya, but I wished to know if you had any colleagues that I could use against you. But it turns out the Riddler had intended to use Midoriya's cherished ones against him all along. What's your sick game this time? Midoriya grits his teeth as he tries to keep his composure. Not only is Shield's life at risk because he had gotten her involved by asking her to decrypt the USB, but the Riddler deduced his identity. The Riddler replies, a simple one, really, then starts to explain the purpose of the hostages. The higher the heat rises in the furnace, the lower the calibration in Mr. Aguchi's bomb transplant. However, the higher the heat in the furnace also means the more likely Miss Shield is to burn to her death. The television screen provides a helpful visual display of a device planted in Aguchi through surgery that connects to the temperature of the furnace Shield is in. If the heat drops in the furnace, Batman looks around the boiler room until he spots what must be the same furnace that Shield is being kept in. I'm afraid Mr. Aguchi will be the one to burst into flames in such a turnout. The Riddler giggles as they share the alternative. Batman racks his brain for a solution to cheat the system. In the meanwhile, he tries to stall for time by stating the obvious, you're making me choose. Yes, I want to push you to your limits and break your mind. What will your code allow you to do and what won't it? Where do you draw the line? The Riddler maintains their same enthused tone as they excitedly elaborate their intentions. Batman reaches for his belt compartment, but remembers that the nitrogen capsules were all used already. Heroes are forced to make sacrifices in the line of duty all the time. He tries to keep his frustration out of his tone as he checks his other belt pouches. But not you, Mr. Midoriya. The Riddler quiets down as though they're getting serious. I've been following your vigilante exploits for a while now. I must say, I'm a fan of your tragic orphan past and motivation. And it's then that Batman realizes how serious they are. How dire this situation truly is. Don't do this. He basically begs his enemy to not take it this far. Without his taser, he can't short-circuit the system either. The boiler room is too far underground for any disrupting device to work. The trap is foolproof. The Riddler has thought of everything. I'm afraid I couldn't stop it even if I wanted to by now. The temperature gauge is automatic and the bomb is disarmable, and the Riddler is merciless. Realizing that he has to choose, Batman begins weighing his options. Shield is an innocent civilian as opposed to Aguchi's criminal record. He also ponders the moral dilemma of whether or not Aguchi is even human anymore after receiving a Namu treatment. The decision seems simple to make, but he hesitates, not wanting to take anyone's life no matter what. Batman places plastique on the furnace and uses his cape to protect himself from the blast that's bound to come. When the metal container is blown open, he fans the flames and steam, rushing forward to pull Shield out of the wreckage. She's drenched in sweat, blonde locks stuck to her face and clothes clinging to her body. Carefully, the vigilante picks her up and places her at distance from the extreme levels of heat. Melissa. He places a gloved hand on her cheek that slides down to her neck so he can check for a pulse. He lets out a breath of relief to learn she's still alive, though she's in poor shape. That was the choice that I was expecting. The Riddler reminds Batman to check the television screen so he can see the consequences of his decision. Croc's heart monitor triggered the explosive attachment, killing him. Batman's body trembles with rage as he makes the promise, I'll break every bone in your body. The Riddler sounds more amused than concerned by the threat. I wonder if you actually will. Let's find out, shall we? Even going as far to remotely open a door in the lower sector of the boiler room. Batman makes sure to set Shield safely on the catwalk higher out of reach before willingly walking into the next trap. He also leaves behind supplies for her such as a medkit to use when she wakes up. Only after ensuring she'll be alright to be left alone does he journey onward. The caped crusader runs down a long corridor, intent on catching his opponent tonight. The stretch of hallways takes him into an abandoned subway station next. Old train cars are on the tracks and cobwebs litter the place. The tunnels there lead him to another sewer system. The underground maze runs through the entire city, taking him from one end to the other. He eventually climbs out of a sewer grate and realizes he's been led to UA. For a moment, he thinks he's been set up. However, no alarms or security detect his presence. Whoever the Riddler is does indeed have access to the school's facility. For a moment, he reconsiders the plausibility of Intelli as a suspect, but that theory gets disregarded when he comes across hired henchmen. He doubts Intelli would have bothered with getting goons. The thugs go down easy, likely acquired in the slums. They're pawns to a game maker such as the Riddler, or rather, to let the vigilante know he's still on the right path. The trail takes him to the principal's office. It's there and then that he figures out who the culprit is. The connections and ties to UA, the intellect, the insight required to pull all of this off, the means of having the resources to do so, the voice, the size and stature. It all adds up. The former principal of UA, Nezu, sits at the desk with his paws folded. Batman tosses one of the goons he's beaten so that they land at the center of the office. Sorry to get blood on your carpet. The Dark Knight stands in the doorway across from the white animal. I quite like that carpet. Nezu frowns while glancing over his desk at the unconscious thug and the blood that's sure to stain. Batman stomps forward as the animal hybrid carries on. I've always liked this entire office. When the vigilante reaches Nezu, he grabs the rodent by his lime waistcoat and hoists him up face to face. I like it so much that from the moment you entered, this office has been pumped with an odorless nerve gas. Batman pauses, evaluating the creature's words. He hopes to call a bluff. You wouldn't risk it affecting you as well. It's effective, I assure you, but that hope is snuffed out just like his vision. Only to humans though. Batman falls over, joining the goon on the floor, also rendered unconscious. There's a bat. Always there's a bat. Watching, waiting to take flight after and only after. It's hanging upside down from a street post, wings furrowed and enclosing all the heat from the light bulb for itself. Down below, its shadow shrouds the silver glint of the gun that goes off in the illumination. When two cold bodies hit the pavement, the boy that remains alive also turns cold from having his world turned upside down from that point onward. And the bat turns upright and flies away from its warm perch. Izuku Midoriya slowly stirs from his unconscious state to consciousness, hanging upside down, his mind in a fog, whether from the blood flow rushing to his head or after effects of the nerve gas that infiltrated his system. He can't think straight and evaluate his predicament just yet. All he can focus on is the usual nightmare and the chafing around his ankles. He never remembers that haunting night the same way, but he never forgets it either. Chains grind against his skin and rip his flesh by the feet, keeping him mounted to the ceiling. There's heavy chains around his wrists too, that keep his arms hanging with his body. If he tries to lift his hands, he realizes just how much effort it takes when it comes to the weight. He opens his mouth, but can't even manage to make a grunt or a groan. His throat is dry, parched. He realizes why when a certain scent fills his nostrils. Damp towels are pressed against his chest and back, relieving him of his armor. They are soaked in vinegar. He twists and turns his body, making them peel and fall off of his torso so that he can breathe better. It's hot. He realizes that he must be in another boiler room, perhaps the one under UA. He tries turning his head to check his surroundings and confirm his suspicions, but finds it extremely difficult to try with his movements hindered. His body aches too. Open wounds and old sores cover his body. He realizes none of the lacerations are new. The scars he's gained over the years were reopened. The towels that had been on him are tinged red, and all other blood that's been drained out went into a bucket beneath him. He grits his teeth and tries raising his arms up over his head again. His pits ache in protest, but he pushes through the pain. He's gone through worse. He bends his waist up, reaching for his ankles next. There's no lock to pick, nor anything to use even if there were. But he's mastered escape techniques that use other methods of absconding. Dislocating toes and thumbs, he slips loose from his capture and falls to the floor. The bucket below gets knocked over, blood spilling everywhere and making a huge puddle. He doesn't care, laying in his own bodily fluids as he pants and breathes heavily from the exertion it took to get free. Midoriya rolls over from his back onto his stomach when he hears the unlatching of a metallic door lock. He plans on performing a push-up to get on his feet, but he's much too weak, malnourishment getting the better of him. Instead of moving any more than he already has, he lays there and watches as a small shadowy figure enters the room with him through the opening of what appears to be a chamber door. Midoriya recognizes the creature when it comes closer. Almost humanoid, the animorph walks on two legs. Nezu, the former principal of UA. The Riddler, a criminal now, a villain. Slowly, but surely, it starts to come back to him. Midoriya grits his teeth even harder, grinding them together. Nezu relishes in his captive's rage, impish and grinning. He rolls up a sleeve to check a watch on his wrist before saying, 13 minutes to come to and escape that time. I do believe I'm starting to wear you down, Mr. Midoriya. At that, Midoriya falters. Something must show on his face, because even Nezu appears surprised, though the human and animal hybrid recovers quickly. Perhaps we are proceeding according to agenda then. He covers his watch before clasping his paws together with a clap. I had assumed your mental limits would far exceed that of an average human's, but it is to be expected that you'd give in just like anyone else. Midoriya wants to ask what the malicious menace means by that, but he's lost his voice. He wants to reach out and snatch the sadistic rodent by the throat, but he's lost his strength. All he can do is lay on the floor in confusion, hoping for an answer or an opportunity. Hope. It's something he'd never allowed himself to have. Nobody had come to save his parents, so he shouldn't expect somebody to come save him. And yet, he finds himself childishly hopeful that he'll be saved all over again. He knocks his head against the rough ground, trying to break that mindset and remind himself not to be foolish. That must do the trick, like smacking or banging a device to get the batteries to work again, because memories begin pulling in all at once. This isn't his first time waking up in this place. He's been trapped here for weeks, months. He'd counted in his head and kept track of time for about 3 to 4 weeks before succumbing to a deep slumber. During that time, he'd been physically tortured and constantly tested to escape despite his injuries. It's nothing he shouldn't have had difficulty with. But over the course of time, he had also begun enduring mental attacks. He's not sure if Nezu utilized toxins and poisons to drug him. Most he had been inoculated for anyways. But his mind had started to fracture and it's now beginning to break. It's like Nezu is trying to make his memory regress back to that night. It had begun with a line of questioning about the vivid details, which Midoriya had refused at first to indulge. But then each scar that told a tale of his journey, training and then crusading, began to reopen. He relived his creation into Batman and all of his secrets were spilled. Did you know the kanji for riddle, Nazo, is closely related to my name Nezu? Midoriya raises his head to see the inhumane vermin waiting with an expectant expression. He does know that. He remembers having a conversation where Nezu broke down the reason he chose to write him riddles due to the irony and the strange humor because of the kanji in his name. He should have put 2 and 2 together with that clue and figured everything out sooner. Midoriya nods, understanding Japanese grammar and spelling regardless of Nezu's quirkiness. So that's where we're at. Nezu pauses as though he's jotting down notes with his thoughts. He then squats down and sits cross-legged across from Midoriya, getting comfortable. I'm not so sure I like that look of disdain in your eyes though. Perhaps you need a reminder as to why I'm doing this in order to regain some semblance of empathy. Midoriya glares into the chimera's beady black eyes but does find himself acknowledging the scar that runs through one of them. He vaguely recalls Nezu telling him the origins of that injury, though he can't remember the exact story. Like any animal, I was subjected to mistreatment and abuse by humans. The hero-turned-villain says it nonchalantly, but there's an undertone of venom secreting from his tone. I was experimented on due to my having a quirk with no regard for my consciousness of what I had to endure on a regular basis. Midoriya tries pushing himself forward to interrupt, but Nezu stops him with a swift backhand. You can't blame me for holding a grudge, Mr. Midoriya. He whispers like he's telling a personal secret. Midoriya turns his bruised cheek back towards the villain, glaring with defiance. I hated humans for their lack of regard for me. Until Shota Aizawa, a racerhead, rescued me. He had discovered the lab's secret experiments on me, the ones they conducted out of the public eye, and exposed them. I had never met a human with genuine compassion for anyone but themselves until I met Aizawa. Nezu carries on with his story anyways, pausing only to add, you reminded me quite a lot of him actually. So, to repay him, I became a hero too. And I learned through him that heroes were more people who cared for others than themselves. That he wasn't the only good-hearted being. Nezu briefly stares off into the distance with a somewhat reminiscent fondness before quickly returning to his former state. That wasn't always the case, of course. Like the lab that had conducted experiments on me and other quirked animals in secret, heroes had their secrets too. Many of them were frauds and fakes. Nezu fiddles with the nails poking out from his paws, staring down at them as though only he alone knows what they're capable of. And that was how I learned that all humans were frauds just like I had formerly believed. They're just deceptive by nature at hiding their true selves. When the chips are down, they're only in it for themselves. Money to get ahead, children for a legacy, fame for a lasting standing, rescue for idolization. Never a sincere, humble, righteous reason for heroics. A small smile crosses the chimera's lips. I tried changing this issue by running a school and attempting to teach prospective heroes the true meaning of being heroes with Aizawa as a role model teacher. But that didn't work either. Nezu springs to his feet with a tiny hop, a sudden burst of energy overtaking him. All I received in return was criticisms from the public. Humans wanted to blame anyone but themselves for their own making of society, and it was easier to blame the ones trying to change it rather than better themselves with adaptation to a change. He giggles like the story he's telling is one big long joke. Rather than shut down UA in an attempt to change the way things function, they just fired me and brought in a new principle. Pin the blame on someone and carry on until they can blame things on their next scapegoat. That's all that they ever do. Nezu begins to walk around Midoriya, circling him as some sort of prey. They would have you believe real heroes don't wear masks. All Might didn't wear a mask. Don't be afraid to show your true face. But you know that's a lie. Once again, it's all about fame and credit. Fake smiles, fake faces. Real heroes aren't people. They have no identity, they just are. A legend. Nezu stops when he completes the cycle to face Midoriya head-on. That's when your influence came into play. After the war, after Aizawa's retirement, you gave me more hope than Tagada ever could that there was still hope for real heroes. Nezu crouches down, leveling his gaze with Midoriya so that they're even. You kept your identity a secret. A vigilante in every sense of the word. Not for fame or fortune, but to make a real change. And I found myself intrigued as to why after all this time, after waiting all these years, why it was now that you had come too late. Imagine my awe when I learned your family history, stemming from the same evil that breeds every other human, corruption and pride and greed. You turned out different thanks to the death of your parents and their true colors unbeknownst to you. The lack of a quirk's power to perceive yourself as higher than others. You worked hard to put yourself at an equal footing to fight that injustice. Truly admirable. Nezu then returns to standing, his gaze looking down upon Midoriya. So I had to test you. I had to see whether or not you were what you appeared to be. Were you a fraud like the rest? Or are you one of a kind? Are you the answer? The solution that I've been seeking to solve the problem of humanity. I brought the truth of your parents to light to see if that would be enough to break you. I tested your morals and your sense of virtues to see if you would be crippled or compromised. His tone becomes darker as he reaches for Midoriya. You remained intact, and so I now must see why that is. And Izuku Midoriya is greeted by a black abyss once again. Suddenly, he's cradled up on a couch. There's a scent of hot cocoa and the warmth of a fireplace. The fire burns brighter than any street lamp, warding off the shadows that seep in through the night. A window tinged blue and white with frost, a blizzard outside, a contrast of pale moonlight. Midoriya feels safe here. No longer a prayer for home, he is home. And he's not alone. Someone is there with him on the couch, running their fingers through his hair. He turns and raises his head to see a woman with long green hair like his own. Mother. Midoriya groggily awakens in a hospital bed. The green-haired woman he had seen in his dreams is still there though, through his blurry vision. When his eyes focus and adjust, he sees that the woman is Tomoko Shiretoko. Shiretoko sits by his bedside, a mixture of various emotions on her face. She stands up and shouts, he's awake. For all the years Kurogiri had been Izuku Midoriya's guardian and caretaker, not once had he truly seen the sorrow and despair leave the orphan's eyes. Vibrant radiance as bright as green grass, full of life and just as soft, were darkened in the shadows and transformed into hardened malachite. Any smile below his eyeline never quite reached his gaze. The scars, mentally and physically ingrained into the boy as he grew older into a man, were mirrored in the reflection of his sclera where blood vessels stemmed in red lines. Not even when Midoriya had met Shield, Shiretoko, or any other potential woman love interest did that dead stare change. Not even when a new family had been built to replace the one he had lost. A pet dog, Ace the stray hound, Eri, an adopted daughter. It was never enough to revive the life that had been lost that night in the alley along with his parents. But now, the eyes Kurogiri stare into, they are not the same he had gotten accustomed to seeing. Izuku Midoriya lives again. He's covered in gauze, wrapped head to toe in bandages as always. Monitors, a feeding tube and drip. He's connected to all sorts of medical equipment. But there's a different air to the room. His mouth isn't set in a grim line. He's smiling. He isn't unplugging the wires and forcing himself to wobble on his weak legs in order to endure more physical punishment. He's resting. And again, his eyes. Kurogiri would swear by anyone that those aren't the same eyes. They're hopeful. The fondness is glossy and glowing in his gaze. There's a love there that had been lost, now found and returned somehow. There's genuine happiness. He's happy. Eri matches his expression. A huge smile on her face as she eats a candy apple and swings her legs in a visitor's chair. The girl is still wearing her school uniform, having just come from classes. The two are enjoying one another's company. Midoriya actually spending the time to be a father figure to her. And we even got to pick our hero names today. She excitedly shares with him how she spent her day, and he actually gives his full undivided attention to listen. Really, what do you decide on? There's an almost childlike innocence to him that matches Eri's energy. The usual stoic demeanor is gone. He's finally done closing himself off and started opening up. He's even taken up the hobby of writing quirk and hero analysis in notebooks again instead of tactically studying and profiling people. Right this very second, for instance, the pencil in his hand is flying across the page as he jots down potential hero name suggestions for Eri. Eri blushes, looking away from his radiance like she's stared directly into the sun for far too long. Suddenly shy, she tucks a stray strand of hair behind her ear before bringing herself to share, I was thinking. Robin. When she looks back at her adoptive father to see his reaction, she sees him urging her to continue with an eager nod. Because Robins are symbols of age, hope, and renewal. Everyone is looking for hope right now, and I thought the idea of renewal was fitting with my quirk. She timidly fiddles with her nails while staring down at her lap before glancing up again. Midoriya's eyes are so tender that they water at the corners, almost on the brink of tears. That's perfect, Eri. He praises her name choice and reasoning with such sincerity that nobody would believe the optimist he is now would have pessimistically considered Lemillion as a symbol of hope pointless. Have you designed a costume yet? He flips to a blank page in his notebook to start doodling outfits next. Kurogiri stares in shock. His yellow slithers are wide bars, taking in the scene in front of him. He's not so sure the man that they found is the same Izuku Midoriya that had gone missing. He'd consider Himiko Toga taking his place as some sort of impostor if she weren't captured. The way he was discovered unconscious outside the hospital was suspicious enough considering he'd come to the manor or cave before going to a public place. But all the tests that had been done, some from heroes at Kurogiri's discretion, proved the man in front of him is the one and only authentic Izuku Midoriya. It's when Eri says, "I was thinking something a bit more colorful than yours." And Midoriya responds, "What do you mean?" Kurogiri suddenly understands why the man he raised is acting so differently. "You don't remember." He utters his realization under his breath. Midoriya has completely forgotten that he's Batman, perhaps even the purpose of his crusade altogether. "Well, I'd want a cape like you have though." Eri obliviously continues to talk as though he does still have some awareness of his alter ego. She doesn't realize nor know it herself yet what's happened to him. "I don't really get what you mean, but sure, capes are cool. You know, All Might's Silver Age costume had a cape." Midoriya scratches his head like he's tending to a nervous itch before returning to doodling in his notebook. "I was thinking more along the lines of practicality. How should it accommodate to your quirk?" Suddenly, Eri's energy depletes, along with her smile. "Oh." Her shoulders droop with the curve of her lips as she mumbles, "I didn't really think about that." Eri's quirk is still a sensitive issue to be worked on, considering Midoriya's memory is faulty though. Kurogiri intervenes to salvage the situation. Miss Eri has been receiving counseling from her homeroom teacher, and that luckily rekindles Eri's enthusiasm. "Yeah, it really helps. Mr. Todoroki says he had trouble deciding whether or not to use his quirk too, so he told me to try flipping a yen coin anytime I have trouble." Midoriya's eyes widen at that. The number 2 hero. He would have already known about the hero's employ had his memory not been toyed with. "Wow, that's amazing, Eri." Becoming disturbed by the way Midoriya is acting and the reason why, Kurogiri hopes to cut things short and speak with a doctor. "I believe that's enough for today." He places a hand on Eri's shoulder but speaks directly to Midoriya. "You shouldn't exert yourself too much." Come on, do we have to go?" Eri complains about having to leave but gets up from her chair anyways. Kurogiri speaks tersely, "Yes, Eri." The authority in his tone surprising her. He realizes his own intensity and backpedals with a softer suggestion. "Why don't you grab something from the vending machines to snack on during the drive back?" "Okay." She nods while walking away but still seems shaken. Midoriya saying, "She's a good kid," doesn't allow Kurogiri to dwell on his mistake for too long though. The Guardian looks at the man he helped raise and replies, "Of course she is. She's her kid," earning a sheepish smile from Midoriya. "Thanks." He rests his head on his pillow while gazing upwards. "I'm just glad she's doing well without me." Kurogiri feels a sharp pang in his chest for some reason. "You'll recover and return home soon," and has the strong urge to set things straight. The thing is, something is stopping him. He's hesitant to snuff out the light in those eyes for the sake of Midoriya's identity if it means. "Until then, I want to ask you before I go, sir." "Izuku." Kurogiri's yellow slants for eyes wobble as they try to stay steady. Midoriya sits back up, hearing and seeing his caretaker's reluctance to speak his mind. He cautiously asks, "What is it, Kurogiri?" Kurogiri clenches his fists before working up the courage. Are you happy?" And looking into those lively eyes again. "More than I've ever been." They're as bright as Midoriya's toothy smile. And Kurogiri can't bring himself to destroy that. He deserves to be happy. The world can do without Batman. Izuku Midoriya can do without Batman. Underneath the purple smog that shrouds his face, Kurogiri is smiling back. "That's all I want for you, my boy." But the thing about smiles is that they can be dangerously contagious. Katsuki Bakugo watches the news with a rictus grin. His movements kept to a minimum thanks to a straitjacket. He settles for rocking back and forth. The television tells him a story about his childhood friend getting into a bad sports car accident. No doubt, the whole thing is a fabrication thought up to disclose the fact that Izuku Midoriya is Batman. A cover story, pure fiction. The public eats it up and actually buys into the bullshit lies. It's so funny that Bakugo lets out a little giggle. Whatever the real reason is that he was admitted to the hospital, he'll no doubt be back in action in no time. After all, the world needs its caped crusader. The bat signal in the sky outside Bakugo's cell window is the proof in the pudding. Bakugo loves how long it stays up. A reminder that Batman is out there despite not being on the official hero listing. But suddenly, the light goes out. The light reflecting in Bakugo's red eyes goes out. His smile drops. Without Batman, crime has no punchline. And it's not funny. Looks like you need me just as much as I need you. Bakugo begins his escape by slipping free from his straitjacket. Arms spread wide, wishing to give his friend a big bone-crushing hug. He plans to reignite the sparks using his own 2 hands. Ready or not, here I come. He allows himself to smile again. Batman, darling. During his last day in the hospital, Midoriya wasn't expecting any visitors, least of all his childhood friend coming to check up on him years later. Kaken, his pointed ashen blonde hair and rugged good looks have barely changed, minus the scar at the center of his forehead. Though Midoriya figures Kaken must have just gotten that wound from doing hero work. Rather, the weirdest changes are his old chum's shift in personality and fashion sense. For starters, Kaken isn't one for wearing a suit and tie, a purple one no less, and the usually gruff attitude he'd inherited from his mother has switched to the opposite side of the spectrum, a much more friendly side to his friend that he didn't know existed until now. Not that he should be complaining. It's nice to be close to Kaken again after all this time. The happy-go-lucky blonde has his arm wrapped around Midoriya's shoulders, pulling him into a side hug while he sits on the edge of the hospital bed. Funny thing happened on my way over here. I ran into that American girl and she asked about you. Maybe you and her should go out on a date. He fabricates a story and weaves lies much to Midoriya's current state of naivety. The bedridden billionaire blushes at the implication of a girl liking him. Really? I don't know, Kaken. Though it must be true if Kaken says it is. He trusts his childhood friend more than anyone after all. Kaken shakes the relative wallflower a little to get the nerves out, laughing a bit. You should make your move. Just go and do something small for a first time out. He pauses like he's thinking of an idea before snapping his fingers with his free hand. Hey, I know. Why don't you take her to see a movie? A sly smile starts to spread across his face. Midoriya looks away, as though he's searching for an excuse. He finds one when he remembers, I can't. I got a responsibility to raise that girl I took in. But Kaken's smile doesn't waver. He just shrugs the reasoning off like he deflected the excuse using a shield. Just bring her with you. Ladies love seeing men are good with kids. His red eyes glint with amusement. Well, Midoriya falters but ultimately realizes there's no winning an argument with Kaken, if you say so. That's the spirit. Kaken bounces on the bed with joy while giving his childhood friend a firm squeeze. Call her up right now and set up the date for tonight. Why don't you? He urges Midoriya on by grabbing the hospital's bedside phone to dial. Tonight, right now, Midoriya squeaks out in surprise. He's reduced to a stammering mess while Kaken dials for him, and he has no choice but to take the phone from Kaken when it's practically shoved in his face. Hello, Melissa Shield's voice comes through the line inquisitively. Midoriya winces when he realizes he's forced to go through with asking her out now. He presses the phone to his ear and clears his throat. Hey, I'm Melissa. Izuku. He blushes at the usage of his first name. I heard what happened. Are you okay? His face goes from warm to hot when he hears the concern in her tone too. Midoriya quickly glances over towards Kaken for advice, but only gets an unhelpful thumbs up in response as his only encouragement. I'm fine. Doctor said I should be discharged later today. He runs a hand through his curly green hair as he mentally prepares himself for what he's about to say next. That's actually partially why I'm calling. I was wondering if why you would like to, tea tonight. Maybe. We should pee probably or could pee potentially. Or what if we W her too? What? Shield interrupts the ramblings in confusion, making Midoriya wince a second time since he's called her. He decides to just rip it off like a band-aid. Hastily, he blurts out, Iri and I were planning to see movie at night, and I was wondering if now would like to come with us. Oh, why didn't you just say so? And she somehow understands the hurried word jumble enough to reply, I'd love to. Midoriya sits up straight, startled by the loudness of her enthusiasm. Really? He's now grinning ear to ear just as much as Kaken. I mean, great. I'll have Kurogiri pick you up at 8. The blonde's thumbs up switches to a much looter hand gesture that flusters Midoriya so much he winds up hanging up on her after setting the time. Kaken. Stop that. The blonde bursts into gleeful laughter, doubling over. Midoriya had never seen his friend laugh so hard before. Seeing Kaken so happy makes him laugh along, smiling too. After they're finished, Kaken feigns wiping a tear in between aftermath giggles. Good to know you can still take a joke. Midoriya chuckles, laying back down. Yeah, he's suddenly tired from exerting himself so much. Despite being cleared for release, he's still not recovered 100%. Thanks, Kaken. I needed this. But he thinks the whole thing was worth the energy. Kaken seems to think so too, flashing a toothy grin. Of course, his voice is a low growl, but he sounds sincere when he adds, what are friends for? Despite the question being rhetorical, he carries on before Midoriya can have any chance to answer. Welp, I should get going. He claps his hands together while backing out of the room. Have a fantastic time tonight. It should be enlightening. Okay. Bye, Kaken. Midoriya raises a brow at the odd farewell but shrugs it off nevertheless. He reaches for the TV remote afterwards, but finds that it's missing from where it was placed. Come to think of it, Kaken turned the television off when he first came into the room, cutting the news station's story about some sort of prison breakout. Now the clicker is missing. Midoriya shakes the suspicion from his mind. He has no idea where those thoughts came from. After all, why would he suspect his best friend? The remote probably just got misplaced or taken by one of the orderlies. Midoriya closes his eyes, figuring that he should get some sleep instead anyways. He needs to be well rested for his date tonight. So he drifts into unconsciousness, allowing slumber to overtake him. Though he gets less than a peaceful nap, his dreams quickly become nightmares, haunting him with an irrational fear of clowns. Green hair, red smiles, obnoxious laughs. The madness echoes within his mind. Then a bullet flies through the clown's head and into his. Midoriya snaps awake, breathing heavily and reaching for his forehead. There's an ache, not quite a migraine, but no bullet hole. There's still something missing from his memory, no matter how hard he strains to remember what it is that he's forgetting. His thumb traces down to his brow as he gives up on trying to clear the fog in his mind. He instead calls for a nurse to take something for his headache and makes another attempt to get some more sleep. The next time Midoriya wakes, it's because Kurogiri has come to sign him out. He's taken out in a wheelchair, much to Iri's delight to push him around. Iri is even more thrilled when he tells her about the date he set for the movie theater. And even though Kurogiri warns him that he just got released for him to be overexerting his energy, the caretaker is just as happily supportive. I never imagined that you would one day spend a night like this. Kurogiri watches Midoriya climb out of the vehicle with a fondness in his tone that matches his slanted yellow eyes. What do you mean, Kurogiri? Midoriya's smirk matches his raised eyebrow. He's expecting some kind of quip. What he gets instead is a pause of silence. Kurogiri takes in the sight of the boy he raised, now a man, standing beside the daughter that he adopted and his date Melissa's shield. Nothing, Izuku. Nothing at all. He begins rolling up the door's window and looks ahead in order to drive away. Midoriya is taken back by his caretaker's actions, but shrugs it off just as quickly. Iri and Shield make the strange moment easily forgettable. Hand in hand, snacks in mouth, they spend the night watching the latest cinematic release. However, it's what happens after that will be committable to memory. When the three come out of the theater, the night has overtaken the city. Dead bulbs darken the sidewalk. No path of light to guide them home. Iri's grip tightens, her hand in Midoriya's. On the other side, Shield holds on just as strong. The touch is a familiar one. The sight is similar, the glint in the dark, the glimmer of something other than hope. A gun. Get back. Midoriya instinctively moves Iri and Shield behind him. He protectively places himself in the front, facing the figure that's moving towards them. The tall figure is wearing a wide-brimmed hat that conceals their face and a long overcoat that drags along the ground. But the color, this is a familiar sight for you, eh, Zuko? And the voice. Midoriya's green eyes reflect the purple outfit before tracing it to the wearer's grinning expression. Midoriya swallows, not wanting to identify the man in front of him. Somehow, he can and can't recognize his childhood friend's appearance at the same time, as though the hero had undergone some sort of transformation to become a villain. He asks anyways, Kaken? But he was right in doubting. I got a new nickname now. It's not Kaken who answers, Joker. The gunshot that rings out is just as deafening as Iri's scream. The sound of the pearls from Shield's necklace hitting the pavement echo in that wide space. Darkness surrounds Izuku Midoriya before closing in on him. Suddenly, the street is small, just like the child watching their mother shot through the stomach. Shield falls as a bullet penetrates her waist. Midoriya bleeds out from a bullet in her abdomen. The shooter, a cruel monster in the dark. The screeching, like the sound of a bat. Despite the absence of a breeze, the night is chilly. Commissioner Tsukachi shoves his hands into his coat pockets, a cigarette hanging out the side of his mouth burning to keep him warm. The heat from the modified floodlight beside him helps a little too. But who he's waiting for couldn't ever be more cold or distant. Tsukachi looks over his shoulder, expecting to find the vigilante hiding in the shadows, but sees Toga instead. The hero crosses his arms over the number emblazoned on his chest, shrugging the shoulders his red cape hangs off of. They've been standing on the precinct's rooftop for over an hour now and Batman is still a no-show. The vigilante's lack of function lately unnerves the two of them, especially considering the last time the Caped Crusader was seen in action had been during the large raid against Penguin. Tsukachi huffs through his nose before pulling the lever on the floodlight, switching the signal off. The commissioner plucks the cigarette from his mouth, tosses it down, and stomps it out as he steps toward the roof access stairs to go back inside. He isn't coming, Toga asks with a frown as Tsukachi walks past him. The hero stares at the city through his visor, the dark empty sky casting a shadow without the bat signal's beam. The commissioner pauses, stopping to look over his shoulder. He catches a glimpse of the same sight. Disappointed with the view, he replies, No, I don't think he is anymore. Izuku Midoriya stares up at that same void of sky covering the city from inside a hospital room. He hadn't expected to be returning to the medical facility so soon, nor for the reason that he is. Midoriya turns his gaze from the room's window to the bed in front of him. Melissa's shield is asleep, covered by a blanket and wired into machines to monitor her health. She had barely made it when rushed to the hospital. Restless even in her sleep, Eri burrows into her guardian's chest. Midoriya looks down, reminded that he's holding her in his arms. His heart aches for her. She had to witness Shield being shot and hadn't stopped clinging to him ever since. He runs his hand through her long silvery hair in an attempt to comfort her. On the television, a news broadcast reports a major development in the hero world. Even with the audio off, Midoriya keeps track of the story. A retired hero has returned to duty after uncovering a ring of corruption in the system. The current principal of UA no less has been exposed by the original principal of UA, the original reclaiming his position. Intelli is shown being carted away in handcuffs as Nezu smiles and waves to the camera. Midoriya's head begins to throb. He forces himself to look away to make it stop. When he does, he spots a fellow greenette in the doorway. Tomoko Shirotoko knocks lightly on the frame before entering, careful not to wake Eri as she asks, "Is she okay?" Shirotoko notices the haggard form of Midoriya and adds, "Are you okay?" "Why, yeah." Midoriya nods as he glances back down to make sure the girl that he's holding truly is okay. "She'll be fine, I think." His words are mumbled, mainly because he's not so sure that he believes them. Shirotoko is quiet for a moment, perhaps contemplating her response. Eventually, she comes further into the room so she's close enough to personally ask again, "And you?" Midoriya blinks as he processes the question. "HM." He shakes his head since his hands are too occupied to wave it off. "I'll be okay." Then asks in return, "Did Kurogiri send you?" "He told me what happened." Shirotoko looks away to hide her embarrassment but winds up looking at the blonde in the hospital bed. "I'm sorry about your friend." Midoriya closes his eyes, unable to stand seeing Shield in such a poor state anymore. He gives Shirotoko the rundown as he mentally recalls it himself. "The medical report that the doctor gave me says she'll never walk again. Shot through the spine, severing it completely. But she's alive." Shirotoko's response makes Midoriya's eyes shoot open in shock. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for that to sound insensitive." No, you're right." He realizes that she was simply trying to console him and sighs. "I just can't help but feel this is all my fault." Shirotoko hums, staring down at the floor as though she'll find the right response there. The greenette instead tries cheering him up. "She's super smart, isn't she? She could probably make something to help her walk again. Or a really cool wheelchair, at least." Not helping. But Midoriya's mood isn't so easily perked up. "Sorry." Shirotoko winces a little. Once she recovers, she redirects the conversation. "I'd like to say I only came to check up on you, but I'm mainly here for Eri's sake." Midoriya raises a brow. "Yeah." Shirotoko nods before explaining, "I booked a flight a while ago. I was planning on asking this anyways, but now, I think more than ever we need to reconsider where we stand with our shared parenting." "What are you saying?" Midoriya does his best to sit up straight without disturbing Eri's nap. He knows that whatever Shirotoko has to say deserves his full undivided attention. And he's right. Her staying here, you said it yourself, that it was only a temporary treatment, that you didn't want it. Maybe I should get her out of this city, this country, and take her to America with me. The shared legal guardian of the girl voices her legitimate concerns. Midoriya tries to reply, but his voice suddenly runs dry. He swallows some saliva to moisten his mouth and tries again. "You mean?" "No, I want to stay." Eri's sudden outburst startles him. She stirs in his lap before reclining to the fabric of his shirt and crying into it. I want to stay." "Eri." Midoriya mumbles in shock over the emotional interruption. He hadn't expected her to react in such a way to the news, especially considering she had been listening in the whole time, pretending to be asleep. He realizes the girl heard everything when she asks him, "You don't want me?" He falters as he tries to respond, but his mind won't allow him to fill in the blanks. He can't imagine a time when he wouldn't have wanted to adopt Eri as his daughter, so he answers honestly, "Of course I want you." Eri's bright red eyes water at the corners before she wails into his chest again, "Daddy." Midoriya holds her close to his heart, shaken by the affectionate title she called him. He cries too. Shirotoko watches the entire exchange, shedding her own single tear. "I guess that's what I get for not being around." She wipes it away with a finger and sniffles a little before forcing a smile. "Looks like she's your kitten now. I do want to keep her safe though." Midoriya recalls the danger he had put Eri in. Kaken, he the white face, the blood-red smile. That wasn't his childhood friend. Bakugo. Or, Midoriya forces himself to think of the shooter as somebody else entirely. "Joker did this all because of me. She's safe in your hands. You just weren't ready for that." Shirotoko steps closer to place a consoling hand on his shoulder. "But Kurogiri and I talked. It's time that we show you something." Kurogiri's voice draws Midoriya's gaze up. He hadn't realized his own caretaker and guardian had arrived a while ago. Midoriya stares at the butler, the man who raised him. There's something different about those yellow slithers for eyes. They're somber, yet accepting. Midoriya turns his gaze back to Shirotoko and sees the same sad look. He shifts from Midoriya's lap to the seat beside him so that he can stand up. He does so slowly. He does so almost warily. What is it that you want to show me? He's beginning to get just as worried as they are. Kurogiri's response is that Midoriya see for himself, a warp gate opening in the center of the room for transport. The man suddenly feels like a boy again, afraid to enter. The dark swirling vortex shares the qualities of the shadows, like he's about to walk into a dark alley. What's in there? He looks to his father figure for guidance, but there's nothing Kurogiri can give him. This is something that Midoriya must do for himself. Midoriya takes slow steps forward and enters the black hole. On the other side, he finds himself at the top of a staircase. A dark tunnel leading down lays ahead of him. He feels afraid, not of the dark, but of a metallic glint, like the one from the gun Joker used. Like the gun in the alley, Midoriya begins his descent. Each step has him feeling closer to the answers at the bottom. Instead of glistening light coming out from the darkness, he's met by a winged mammal. A flying creature comes at him, screeching as though calling his name. And he realizes then that it's a bat. It's not the first time that Izuku Midoriya has been in this interrogation room. It is, however, the first time that he's not on the receiving end of the table. Instead, he finds himself sitting across from the former principal of UA. Intelli smiles sidelong at him, a curious glint in her gaze. Well, Mr. Midoriya, to what do I owe this unexpected visit? She asks. Cutting straight to the chase, Midoriya leans forwards with his elbows propped on the table. He keeps his voice level as a precaution but wants the woman to hear him when he says, I think you're being framed the same as I was. Same person, same play, just a different stage. That manages to break her bemusement at his presence. She immediately shifts gears, turning serious, and returns the propped posture to lean forward and meet him halfway. What do you know about that? Her tone lacks suspicion but it is demanding of answers. But unfortunately, Midoriya has none. He shakes his head apologetically. Nothing really. Just hearsay without evidence. Intelli sighs, just short of cursing under her breath, and sits back in her chair. And here I thought you were smarter than you were letting on. She sounds disappointed and Midoriya tries not to be too offended by the remark. But what she says next does help remedy any ill feelings. Though I did misjudge you before. I'm sorry for suspecting and coming down on you so hard. Midoriya waves a hand dismissively. Water under the bridge. He then leans back in his own chair and prompts her with that same hand. What matters is clearing up your own accusations now. Intelli nods uncommitably, like her mind is distant. Midoriya doubts tea has been on the menu for her during her holding. Batman's disappearance was linked to the school. Fake evidence planted by Nezu like the security footage of you at the Iceberg lounge. She explains that his capture and torture had been pinned on her. He contemplates the grand scope of that agenda, to lure him there and Nezu regain his position as principal via the setup. There has to be a reason he wanted to be back at UA specifically. He doesn't doubt Nezu could have obtained political power or another higher standing of status quo had he wanted. So what was so special about the hero's school? Had he missed something in its halls? You didn't see any of it coming. He has to wonder if Nezu had been in contact with Intelli beforehand or if this had been completely under her nose. No, he completely blindsided me. She frowns as she admits that he caught her by surprise. So there's no leads there. Intelli was somehow just a pawn in this giant game of Nezu's. Then we've got that in common. He massages his temple as he recalls the way his mind was toyed with and damaged. Intelli peers at him, trying to see what it is that he's hiding from her just as much as she is from him. How are you involved in all of this? She wonders. Midoriya's mind lingers on his torture. The trauma makes him grind his teeth together. He knows that it has everything to do with him somehow. I'm not sure, but I'm going to find out. He starts to stand up in hopes that he'll be able to get better results elsewhere if Intelli isn't going to be any help. Intelli purses her lips and gives him a withering look. That doesn't sound like a good idea. You aren't a hero, Mr. Midoriya. But he turns his back to her, already treading towards the door. We don't all need quirks to be heroes. He mutters it just loud enough for the ex-principal to hear. When he gets to his car, he connects the Bluetooth speaker to his phone and calls Kurogiri. His guardian answers on the first ring. How did it go? Kurogiri tries not to sound as eager as Midoriya feels to gain some answers. I was right that she had been framed by Nezu, but didn't learn anything new other than that confirmation. Midoriya grumbles as he shifts the car into gear and begins driving. It seems this one is as slippery as ever. Kurogiri voices his own displeasure over the denon, but quickly recovers to change the conversation and mood by extension by saying, You should return home then. Mistress Eri has been asking for you. Midoriya shakes his head, then realizes Kurogiri can't see him. Now's not a good time. Nezu needs to come first. He cuts in between traffic to gain some speed, though he knows not which way he's going in his search. Sir, I understand that your mission is important to you, now more than ever with your memory returning. But this girl needs a father. Kurogiri continues to plead over the speaker, making Midoriya pause and slow on the speedometer. It's true. I've been keeping her at arm's length. I'm scared to get too close, in case I lose her too. He admits to his fears of connection. It's why he'd also pushed away Shirotoko, Shield, and even Kurogiri. But it's then that he realizes he already has those connections. He already has those feelings, those fears. His eyes widen when he realizes what Nezu has planned. It suddenly makes sense. Why Nezu organized things so that he'd regain control of UA. Why he killed the Yakuza and planned to use Midoriya for custody. It was all to gain access to Eri. The car's tires screech in protest as Midoriya hits a sharp turn. Nezu moves the Black Knight into position on the game board. In front of him is a vast array of chess pieces, the pawns mid-battle. With a tiny toothy grin and a twinkle in his otherwise black beady eyes, he awaits his opponent's move. Much to his delight, player 2 doesn't disappoint. The set of double doors to the office swing open and Batman enters through the entrance. This time, the vigilante has on a mouthpiece gas mask. Nezu can't help but giggle at the overdramatic precautionary antics of the self-proclaimed hero. I see you've learned from your past mistakes. He waves his paws up in a mock surrendering flourish. Despite all the bravado, it's just a joke. There's no toxins or gases filtering around through the air this time. It's over. I know what you've been scheming. Batman growls through a voice-modulating filter in the mouthpiece covering his chin. He stands tall, cape closed around him as the back-pointed ends drag along the carpeted floor. Whether it's a bluff or not, the vigilante comes across as confident. Nezu relaxes in his chair, folding his paws over one another. The grin hasn't left his maw. That's because you would already know had all of your memories returned. That remark gives the Batman pause. The vigilante's stride stops as he considers what the newly reappointed principal said. The two meet one another's gaze. Nezu's dark voids stare into the white narrowed lens of Batman's cowl. That speaks volumes without either of them saying a word. Nezu deduced that not all of the vigilante's memories returned and not even the vigilante himself knew that was the case. What do you want to use Eri for? Batman opts for a different approach just to be cautious. He's laying his own bait as Nezu had to figure out his amnesia remains. The question meant to confirm whether or not his suspicions about the girl's involvement are true while simultaneously figuring out the grander scope of those supposed plans. Sometimes, a damaged mind can be too much to handle. Nezu mimes drawing the word damaged in cursive over his forehead. The tiny claw he uses as a pen courses through his fur. The nail eventually reaches the scar that strikes through one of his eyes, resting there momentarily. Kurogiri, Bakugo, Hugh. Nezu names a few damaged minds before losing his grin and adding one more, me. Batman raises his head higher, noting that last part the most. He squints with a critical gaze while prompting Nezu to elaborate, you. I'm cursed with knowledge, I'm afraid. Nezu feigns to be dramatic by placing the back of his paw against his forehead. Receiving no reaction from the Caped Crusader over his antics, the Chimera settles back into his seat with a sigh. I'm talking about split personalities, Mr. Midoriya. Or, at least, an imbalance of thought. Still no reaction from the vigilante. Nezu resists, grinding his claws into his desk. Do I really have to spell it out for you? Kurogiri, your caretaker is a NOMU created from the corpse of a former UA student. He's as fractured a mind as Bakugo is nowadays. Or you are with your alter ego as Batman. That gives Midoriya a pause, shaking him to his core. Having conquered the art of fear, it's been a while since something has sent chills up his spine, but that revelation puts him off balance. Kurogiri is. Midoriya trails off and swallows the words that were on his tongue. The vigilante pushes that matter to the back of his mind and refocuses on the enemy in front of him. Your mind was fractured too, a result of lab experimentation. Nezu reiterates his origin with a nod. It's funny how animalistic humans are compared to what you all consider snarling savages. Not easily misled. Batman puts the conversation back on the right course. What does this have to do with Eri? He takes an intimidating step forward. I was getting there. Nezu returns the intimidation with a sharp tone and dark glare. He waves a paw around while explaining. Just as the Yakuza had seen value in her quirk, so do I the ability to rewind. Imagine the ability to not just heal wounds, but to cure illnesses and so much more. She's still learning to control her quirk, and you can't force that out of her. Batman takes another step forward. Beneath his cape that's wrapped around him like a cloak, his gloved hands are balled into fists. Oh, I'm well aware, and I don't doubt that if she were to get a handle on it, that she wouldn't be more than willing to accommodate myself and others with such impairment. Nezu nods in agreement before gesturing towards the vigilante. Only if she were to be brought up by a true hero who could teach her such morals, of course. Certainly not the Yakuza. The response leaves Batman wary. He studies the Chimera's casual body language, searching for any signs of hidden intent. He speaks his thoughts aloud as he draws the conclusions that Nezu is making. You were testing me. to make sure, to ensure you were adequate enough to test her. Nezu finishes the sentence for the vigilante in his own words. And now that I'm back here at UA where I'll be free to conduct surveillance, she will receive even further guidance in the right direction. The principal then cheerily spreads his arms in an extravagant fashion as though to bring on an applause after performing a magic trick. You're a lunatic. All that for what? She's just a kid. Batman stares at the animal in disbelief. Sensing that the vigilante isn't as joyful about the prospect as he is, Nezu switches to a somber tone. A child who's been through a lot, just as you were. I know. I'm not incapable of sympathy. He offers pity of some kind that the orphan rejects with a sneer. You sure have a funny way of showing it. Batman recalls the wild goose chase and all of the effort Nezu put into such an overly complicated scheme. He's not quite convinced that the Chimera is telling the truth. What can I say? Puzzles, riddles, and games are my forte. Nezu leans back with a mischievous grin plastered across his muzzle. The black dots on his head that account for eyes don't sway from Batman's white lens. The vigilante turns his head, looking away. He sees the chess game that Nezu has set out in front of him. The placement of pieces looks like a war stratagem table. And you don't like to play by yourself. Batman keeps the principal talking in order to figure out more. And Nezu is happy to oblige. It's no fun to play alone. He moves a white pawn to capture a black pawn while giggling. You of all people should know that Batman's eyes narrow as he watches the animal play with his toys, wondering whose lives are in the balance of those pieces. Nezu keeps the black pawn in his paw, holding it up in front of the caped crusader, brooding. It can get lonely. Batman moves his attention away from what's in front of him, looking for something hidden, assuming the trickster is trying to distract him. When the vigilante notices a second chess table stowed away, he looks back with a suspicious stare. If that game board is for me, who was the other? He treads carefully with the inquisitiveness but doesn't back down. Nezu glances at the second game board, as though he just now realized it was there. Then he perks up at the mention of it, recalling its existence. He smiles with a tad of fondness as he says, "Oh, quite the humorous fellow. Not like I remember during the years of his tutelage. He and I shared a cup of tea together." Batman's eyes expand as he starts putting together the clues pointing towards the other player's identity. Panic begins to rise from the pit of his stomach. He demands rather than asking, "Who was it, Nezu?" Nezu blinks when he hears the vigilantist's tone. "Bakugo, your friend, the Joker," but provides the answer to the question anyways. His assumption, now confirmed to be the case much to his horror, leaves the caped crusader stupefied. What have you done? He has difficulty processing the terrible news. But once he does, he charges towards Nezu with a vengeance. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The principal holds his paws up in a placating gesture that does absolutely nothing to stop the vigilante. Batman grabs Nezu by the front of his suit and hoists him upwards. "I didn't. Did you tell him everything that you told me? Your plan with Eri?" Batman yells into the Chimera's face. Spit flies from the angry vigilantist's mouth, dotting the animal's fur. Oh, of course. In order to make conversation, Nezu stammers as he reels from the fit of rage. Without a surface beneath him, his legs dangle in the air as they search for sturdy footing. "Lunatic. Madman." Batman furiously shakes the enemy he has in his grip before tossing the foe across the room. Nezu tumbles into a bookshelf, startled by the roughhousing. "You're not as smart as you think you are." The vigilante growls more like a beast than the actual animal. "What do you mean? I'm not the one being a ruffian." Nezu spits blood out of his mouth as he stands up and dusts off his now wrinkled suit. Though caught off guard before, he's now prepared for another rush and prepares to defend himself if need be. But Batman brushes past Nezu, heading for the exit instead. He curses on his way out. "Did it ever occur to you that Bakugo doesn't want to be cured?" And it finally settles in as to why Midoriya is behaving the way that he is. Realizing that he may have misjudged how psychologically damaged Bakugo has become, Nezu places a paw against his forehead. "Oh my, I have made a mistake." He admits under his breath the dire miscalculation on his part. "You just put that poor girl's life in danger. If anything happens to her, you'll have a lot more than a damaged mind." And Batman leaves him with a parting promise that only reinforces the consequences of that error. Midoriya doesn't even wait until he gets to the car to contact Kurogiri. He places a finger to the comlink within his cowl. "Get Eri and seal yourselves in the cave. I'm on my way. I'll explain everything when I get there." He urgently gives orders while hurrying down the halls of UA without bothering to elaborate as to why he's demanding such a thing. He expects his partner in crime to question the order or provide some sort of remark, but gets nothing. Confused and worried by the radio silence, Midoriya tries again. "Kurogiri," he asks. One more time, Kurogiri. Just when he thinks the line is dead, Midoriya hears the rustling of a mic. However, his relief is only momentary. A laugh piques the audio in his ears. It's a demented cackle that he's all too familiar with. "Sorry, Smokey the mama bear can't come to the phone right now." And the shrill voice that follows isn't very assuring either. "Kakin, what have you done?" Midoriya tries but fails to keep the distress out of his voice as his run turns into a sprint down the corridor he's in. He forgets about finding the doors to leave. He makes his own exit through a window, several stories up. His cape expands behind him, acting as a parachute to slow his descent and a paraglider to guide his fall. If you've done anything. Midoriya cuts himself off as he struggles to find the right threat to use. Oh, don't be such a worrywart. The speaker system blares as the villain gets right into the mic. Midoriya grits his teeth, resisting the urge to flinch. How could I start without you? No, I'll gladly wait. And the not-so-assuring assurance ushers him to hurry. He hops into his vehicle, revving the engine as it comes to life at his command. I'll be there. Just keep your promise and wait. Midoriya pushes on the throttle and presses down on the gas pedal. The sleek-shaped automobile cuts through the wind as it races forward. You hear me, Kaken? You wait for me. Midoriya cuts hard on the steering wheel and takes a turn down a service road to use as a shortcut back to his home in the manor. You know me better than anyone, Bat Boob. I'm a man of my word. A giddy response plays through the car's speaker system this time, followed by a darker toned, see you soon. The vigilante yells in aggravation while urging the car to go faster. The speedometer reaches its limit and the tires tread the terrain with extreme force, weaving in and out of lanes being constructed. The vehicle runs over cautionary traffic cones without a care. With a press of a button, a flame shoots out the back of an exhaust port and the car's momentum carries it over a dead end and into a drain canal. The half-pipe serves as a raceway, a direct chute to the destination. Midoriya takes the route to the cave entrance, barreling through a waterfall that obscures its location. The car's tires bounce and skitter on landing as it swerves into the parking bay. The driver doesn't even wait for the vehicle's motion to cease, hatch sliding open up top for him to climb out. The caped Avenger lands with his boots making a heavy thud, headlights illuminating his arrival. He's met by a single applause coming from the rafters above. When Batman looks up, he's not surprised to see the pale face of his former childhood friend staring back down. A blood-red smile is smeared around his lips and his hair has been redyed green, punctuated by a purple dress attire. You do know how to make an entrance. The horrific clown visage greets his mortal enemy. Midoriya offers no words in response, instead opting to aim his grappling hook and firing it so that he can ascend to the same catwalk. His cape trails behind him up and over the railing. Only when he's face to face with his rival does he see Eri is also there. Her mouth is covered with duct tape, a red smile sharpied over it. Though brimmed with tears, her eyes light up upon seeing her guardian. Let her go. Midoriya faces the villain with the fury of a father. But Bakugo appears unfazed, laughing without a care. It looks like you got your swagger back. He instead addresses the vigilante's apparel with a gesture from the switchblade that slides out from under his sleeve. It presses against Eri's neck, unconsciously making Midoriya lean forward with the urge to rescue her. If you hurt her, I'll kill you, damn it. Midoriya growls through clenched teeth. He fights the instinct to protectively rush in, not wanting to risk Eri's safety. Bakugo frowns, cocking his head to the side. Now hold on a minute. That doesn't sound like you at all. Don't tell me. He narrows his eyes at the vigilante in front of him as though searching for a person that isn't there. Watching the gears work in a dismantled mind pushes Midoriya forward. Not wanting the unstable villain to do anything rash, he tries to keep him talking. I know exactly who I am. It's you who's lost their way. No, even your banter is all wrong. Midoriya seethes through his teeth when he sees Bakugo press the switchblade against Eri's throat a tad more. Well, this is just disappointing. You're just playing dress-up at this point. Bakugo looks the vigilante up and down before setting his eyes on his hostage. But maybe Eri here can rewind you back to your former self. Yes, that's it. Midoriya breathes in and out before looking at the girl in captivity. Eri, just do what he tells you to. He tries to keep his tone calm to ease Eri's nerves while addressing her. Come on, brat, listen to Papa. But Bakugo makes it difficult. The blade begins digging into her throat, breaking skin. The threat is to urge her to use her quirk on Midoriya. But Eri's defiant eyes move from her guardians to her capturers, horn on her head glowing as it grows for a different purpose. A bright light illuminates the darkness of the cave, disturbing the bats that roost from stalactites above. The mammals swarm down as they're awoken by the increasing glow. Bakugo lets out a blood-curdling scream as he's enveloped by the light. It's so blinding that Midoriya can't even shield himself with his cape, nor can he see Eri anymore, concerned for his daughter's safety. He takes now as the opportunity to blindly rush in. Midoriya finds his arms around the waist of a slender but well-defined man. He realizes that he's grabbed onto Bakugo and not Eri. Closing his eyes, he commits and follows through with his charge. In one continuous move, he tackles the villain off of the rafters, bending forward so that they plummet head first. They hit cold water, a rude wake-up call. Bakugo breaks the surface first, twisting free from the jacket that Midoriya is holding onto. Midoriya discards the coat and swims after him, breathing in the cave's humid air once he too reaches the top. Gloved fingers grab the fiend by the throat. Who the fuck are you? Bakugo chokes out a surprised response as he's manhandled by the demon visage. Bats dart left and right as the vigilante pulls Bakugo close so that they're nose to nose. I'm vengeance. The caped crusader cloaks himself in darkness as he screams, I am the night. Finally finding himself, remembering who he is, he proclaims, I am Batman. A strong left hook knocks a few teeth loose, sending Bakugo back. The blonde, hair washed out by the guano-filled pool, staggers and trips over a stone. Batman is upon him before he can get up, already raining down more punches. There is nothing the vigilante can do to cause him the agony that he brought upon others. But he can come close. He can crush the clown's windpipe and sever all oxygen from his brain. He can push the criminal's ribs right through his lungs and rupture his heart. He can pound the villain's skull into the pavement until it fractures into so many pieces that brain spills out. Distantly, Kurogiri staggers into the lower section of the cave. He's disheveled, suit torn in places and metal collar dented. His yellow eyes broaden when they see what's happening. You have to think about what you're doing. Who and what made you who you are. Think of how an animal like him could never understand that. It's what makes him who he is and you who you are. Think, all those things are what the vigilante should have done long ago. To every single one of the criminals he fought. When he put them down, he should have put them down permanently. Or so he believes now, on top of the one who dared take a child and threaten their life. God help me. You have thought this through. I don't know how I could stop you, but I won't let you throw your life away. The weak body of the man who raised Midoriya stumbles forward to try and grab his son. Kurogiri. Midoriya feels his father figure wrap his arms around him. A warm embrace that prevents him from further beating on Bakugo. If Batman wanted to be a killer, he could have started a long time ago. But it's a line. If you cross that line, if you kill tonight, man or animal, in my eyes, you'll be no different from him. Kurogiri's hold tightens around Midoriya's shoulders. The man trembles in the grip like a boy, slowly breaking. Bakugo lay unconscious in a pool of blood, smile wiped off his smug face. In the cave's pit, the tight space looks a lot like an alley. It was from an alley that a man with a gun emerged from the darkness and murdered Midoriya's mother and father. In that single moment, his childhood ended. He made a promise on their graves that he would rid this city of the evil that took their lives. Tonight, he nearly became a part of that evil. The bullet never left the chamber tonight. So the bullet hole in Bakugo's forehead has vanished. Yuri's quirk has reverted him from that same evil. The little girl joins Kurogiri and her father, her childhood just beginning. Snowflakes dance in the shimmering sky, a choreographed ballet conducted by a gentle wind under the sun's spotlight. Steel gray clouds roll in the distance, coming to close the final curtain. Not before all of the sunlit glitter can descend and cover the stage, though. The city, glistening windows illuminating the snowfall, tells the story of the play. In the end, the earth of yesterday is covered as white as any new page, marking the script's final chapter. It's the holiday season. Parents rush from work to buy their children gifts with their day's hard-earned money. Those same kids throw snowballs and sled down slopes in the areas unoccupied by adults. It's a wondrous sight to behold. Colored lights are strung between lampposts and traffic lights to make things all the more merry. It works. People are happy. Izuku Midoriya walks along the sidewalk, boots crunching the ice beneath his footfalls, taking it all in. His hands are shoved into the pockets of his full-length overcoat. The wool fabric is warming despite the bitter chill in the breeze. A green scarf is wrapped around his neck, pulled up past the point of his chin. The color complements his hair and the black of his wintry jacket. But the red of the rose he brandishes stands out the most. He cuts into a corner pocket, taking the alleyway separate from the sidewalk. Snow tries burying litter and trash, but the garbage still breaches the surface of white. Graffiti is glossed over with ice, but it's not washed away. The memory remains here, not so easily forgotten. Izuku bends a knee, crouching down at the exact spot of the alley that he lost his parents. He places the rose that he brought down, paying his respects. A plane soars overhead, casting a winged shadow over the orphan as he honors his mother and father. He's reminded of Tomoko Shirotoko and how she caught a flight back to America. She'd tried convincing him of going with her. But this is his home. A black cat meows as it steps into the alley, paws sinking into the snow. The feline hops from there onto a window ledge and slinks away, tail flicking back and forth. The shadow of the aircraft leaving the city passes by, snowflakes floating down and dotting Izuku's coat. He can see Yue from here. The prestigious hero school had somehow survived scandals and much more to remain open. But all thanks to the cooperation of its principal turning himself in. After his mistake with Katsuki, Bakugo put a girl's life in danger. He surrendered peacefully. He deemed himself just as much a failure as he had considered the rest of hero society. Nezu confessed to his crimes and got Intelli her position back. And now, the same girl that had been put in danger by the school is kept safe there. Yue reopened its dorming system and received better security from the tech department at Midoriya Enterprises. Thanks to a joint effort with the school, the company was able to recover its costs. The damage done with the money returned to those who had it stolen was reimbursed and covered. Funding to the hero school was back to an all-time high, with the support company backing its departments and vice versa. It had also helped that Izuku sold his manor and resigned from his seat at the board of directors. It wasn't just a PR stunt, but a move he felt necessary after the revelations of his parents and the money that he inherited from them. He held a press conference and addressed all that had been disclosed to him by Commissioner Tsukachi. It was time for him to relinquish control of his business and accept responsibility on his family's behalf, because he still loves them despite what they did. Izuku stares at the rose he put down, imagining it would be kept in a vase instead if his mother were still alive. Perhaps his father would have given her a whole bouquet instead. He misses them. He forgives them for what they did, and he'll continue to fight for them, not for who they were, but what had happened to them. He rewrites his vows as he's showered by snow, the slate wiped clean. The earpiece Izuku keeps on him beeps in his ear, alerting him to an incoming call. He wished not to be disturbed but accepts it anyways, mainly out of curiosity of who could be reaching out to him. It's not Kurogiri. He had relieved his caretaker of duty. After Nezu revealed to him his guardian was really just a Namo made to be a butler, he decided to free Kurogiri of his slavery. Whoever the modified man was before and who he is now, he was now able to figure out for himself. Yes, Izuku presses his index and middle finger to the communicator in his ear. Hey, Izuku, a voice he recognizes answers, one that brings him both joy and pain. Melissa, he can already envision the blonde now. Except, what he sees is the woman he allowed to be put in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. He closes his eyes, trying to black out the mental image. He sees what his childhood friend had become instead, the one who had put her in the wheelchair. Izuku opens his eyes, preferring to see anyone other than that. Do you have any plans to celebrate? Melissa sounds hopeful though. It could just be the time of the year, but he hopes that her tone is an indication that she's on the right track to recovery. Even so, he has to turn her down. He shakes his head, then remembers she can't see him. I'm not very used to celebrating. He looks down the alley and remembers the night he lost his childhood cheer for holidays. Come on, it's the holidays. You have to, but Melissa doesn't let it go. She urges him on as his eyes land back on the rose that's being specked with snowflakes. You shouldn't spend the day alone. The flower is almost buried in the snow like the trash. I won't, Izuku whispers. He looks up at the sky. The gray clouds that had been distant before are now beginning to block out the sun. Soon, bats will be leaving their caves to hunt during the night. I have another reason to celebrate. He blinks when he feels his eyes becoming moist. Oh, and Melissa hears the crack in his voice to know he means what he's saying. Last night was the first time in 54 years without violent crimes. Izuku allows tears to roll down his cheeks as he watches the first of the city's bats take to the snowy sky. Snowflakes float gracefully from the night sky, pale in the glow of moonlight and glittering from the illumination of street lamps. Some droplets of ice land in between the small crevices of buildings, beneath the brick chimneys and smokestacks, under the thick smog of pollution where even more filth resides. Snow starts building a foundation of slippery slush, beauty corrupted and turned ugly. Darkness has fallen over the city and taken with it the cheerful laughter of children during the day. Now, predators roam. Parents have hidden their young. Cold went from playful nipping to bitter biting. Bats swarm the sky in search of prey. The violent flapping of their wings disturbs the vermin that hides away below. Rats scurry into sewer drains and beneath fully maggot-loaded dumpsters. The shadows circle overhead, keeping them in check. Suddenly, an even greater shadow with a much larger wingspan overtakes the others. The smaller flying mammals give way to their bigger counterpart. The night belongs to them all. The hunt is shared, but the city belongs to him. The Batman. Below, a family of 3 hurries down a sidewalk. They were late getting out of a store, and even later to catching a cab or a bus. With transportation no longer running, they find themselves running. The chill of the night snaps at their heels. They think about cutting through an alley to lessen the time that they're exposed to the cold's bite. They foolishly try the shortcut. A young boy runs in between his mother and father, all of them oblivious to the phantom stranger ahead of them that blocks the alley's path. Like the ghost of Christmas past, a man holds the family at gunpoint. He demands a wallet from the boy's father. The proud parent steps in front of his child protectively. His wife at his side, silver necklace glimmering in the snow like a pearl necklace, is on the verge of screaming. All Might had died a long time ago. He won't be coming to their rescue. It's the holiday, so there are no police officers on duty to patrol the streets. Not even the current heroes are willing to sacrifice their personal time away from their own families to protect another's. Only one who knows what it's like to lose a family comes. The dark night of the night. A horned demon visage rises up from the shadows behind the family, positioned directly over the boy. White eyes contrast the black void of the monster's shape, narrowing to fixate on the man trying to mug the family. Suddenly, the gun in the bandit's hand begins to shake. His palms have become sweaty, fingers losing their grip on the firearm. The caped crusader doesn't waver though, not even the slightest tremor while having a murder machine aimed at him. Continue to point that gun at us, and I guarantee you will never walk again. The vigilante come to the family's rescue speaks in a low and raspy voice that startles even them. The mother and father split apart, gasping. The boy in between becomes frozen in place, gawping at the ominous figure that towers above him. The gunman lets out his own gasp through an equally jaw-dropped mouth. The terrifying presence of the living shadow's threat holds a heavy-weighted vengeance. The weapon slips from the man's hold and falls to the ground, sinking in the snow. After a moment of shivering in the night, exposed to fear, the cowardly and superstitious criminal flees. His boots leave indentions in the snow, a trail of footprints that Batman plans to follow later. Wise choice, but first he eases his posture to be less intimidating around the family. The would-be mugger wasn't the only one petrified by the Dark Knight's appearance. Go home. He even reins in the amount of deepness put into his tone when turning to address them. The parents shakily nod, waving their son over. Once grouped together, the three of them scamper off just as quickly as the criminal fled. Batman is left alone in the alley, standing in the place of where the boy had stood. It's Christmas. That family has nothing. You should have given them some sense of hope. But the silence of solitude is short-lived when the communicator in his cowl crackles to life. Melissa Shield communicates with him over the comm as his oracle. She watched everything through the video recording lens that cover his eyes. The boy isn't hurt. His parents are alive. That's more than some people can hope for. Batman looks back to see if the child and his family are still around. They aren't. Everything else is replaceable. He whispers a breath of condensation before facing forward again, and then begins following the trail that the criminal left behind. Melissa winces, sensing that the vigilante's words resonated with himself. When not Batman, he's Izuku Midoriya, the boy who had been orphaned and grew up unconventionally. She figures she crossed a line, that perhaps he did want to spend the night alone. Well, I've been blabbing in your ear all night, haven't I? I'm sorry. I'm still getting used to this. I'll turn it off now. She reaches for the button on her computer to cut the line and leave him to his vices, but her finger stops short of pressing it, hovering over the button when she hears Izuku's response. Don't apologize. He still sounds sad, but he's no longer using the voice he does as Batman. And don't turn it off. She watches through the visual recording of his mask as he leaves the alley and enters the vast city. I don't mind the company.